3 chairs, no guests, and a question no detective could ignore. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Where are you joining from? Share it in the comments. Your words bring these mysteries alive. I'm grateful for each one. It was the kind of evening that Maigret preferred for staying home. A low, unbroken drizzle over Paris. The sort of rain that didn't bother with drama, but persisted. Patient. And fine, beading on the hat and soaking into the coat without one quite noticing, until the warmth was gone from one's shoulders. He sat at the kitchen table, his elbows resting on the oilcloth, watching Madame Maigret slice an apple for the tart she had begun that afternoon. The smell of the pastry dough still lingered faintly, mixing with the damp scent that followed him indoors. They had eaten early, a simple stew, good bread, a wedge of Saint-Nectaire, and now the flat on Boulevard Richard Lenoir was wrapped in that particular quiet that came after dinner, when the streets outside softened into darkness, and the sound of a bus passing below seemed an intrusion. Madame Maigret's knife tapped gently against the plate as she worked, her movements unhurried. She had been telling him about the postman's niece, something about a new fiancé from Marseille, but Maigret's mind, though it listened, wandered toward nothing in particular. On the table beside him, his pipe lay waiting, still cool. He reached for it, tamped fresh tobacco into the bowl and struck a match. The flare lit his face for a moment, catching the lines at the corners of his eyes, before the flame died and the smoke began its slow curl upward. It was not that he was restless. Rather, there was a mild expectancy about him, as though the evening might still bring something, though he could not have said what. The telephone rang. Madame Maigret gave him a glance, not reproachful but acknowledging the inevitable, before turning back to her apples. Maigret crossed to the hallway, lifting the receiver with a slow, practiced hand. "Maigret," he said. It was Janvier. His voice carried that half-apologetic tone of a man who knows he's disturbing someone at home. A body had been found in a small pension near the Gare de l'Est. Nothing sensational, Janvier insisted, but the circumstances were odd. The woman who discovered it, the proprietor, had asked, almost insisted, that Maigret be the one to come. Maigret leaned against the wall, pipe in his other hand, letting Janvier's account run on. A quiet guest house, a middle-aged man dead in his rented room, nothing stolen, no sign of violence. But there was something else, Janvier said, though he hesitated over it, as if unsure whether it mattered. "In the room," Janvier said finally, "there were 3 chairs, just the 3. Nothing else unusual. But she says it's not right. There should have been only 2. Maigret grunted softly, the kind of sound that could have meant anything. He could picture it already. The narrow corridor lined with doors, the faint smell of cooking from the kitchen below, the pale wallpaper with damp marks in the corners. Rooms in such places were rarely remarkable, and yet a thing like that, 1 chair too many, could be the sort of detail that lodged in the mind and refused to be dismissed. "I'll come," he said simply. When he returned to the kitchen, Madame Maigret was placing the sliced apples in neat concentric circles. He told her it was nothing serious, probably nothing at all, but he had to go. She nodded, her expression betraying neither surprise nor complaint, and handed him his scarf. A few minutes later, Maigret stepped out into the misting rain, the collar of his overcoat turned up. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke. Somewhere, a street lamp flickered, its light falling across the wet cobblestones. He walked toward the waiting taxi, feeling that mild expectancy solidify into something sharper, not excitement, but the quiet curiosity that came when the ordinary threatened to tip, just slightly, into the strange. By the time they turned toward the Gare de l'Est, the drizzle had become a fine, steady rain, blurring the lights of the cafes and sending the last market stalls scurrying to close. Maigret drew on his pipe, gazing through the glass, and thought about a small, nondescript room with 3 chairs where there should have been 2. The taxi set him down on a narrow street that carried the constant murmur of trains under the rain. The facades were the kind that damp and neglect conspire to darken, stucco peeling in the corners, iron balconies with a film of rust like old blood. A neon sign somewhere down the way hissed and failed in bursts so that its red letters blinked. uncertainly throwing a sluggish glow over the sidewalk. Maigret paid, stood a moment under the shallow awning of the pension, and adjusted his hat. Steam rose from a grill nearby. The smell of sausage and onions lay under the wet air like a blanket. He felt the ordinary life of the quarter pressing, softly against him, the porters coming off shift, a couple arguing low under a shared umbrella, and it steadied him as a familiar hum steadies a sleeper. Inside, the guest house had a hall that immediately narrowed, as if it were holding its breath. A glass door, smudged by years of hands, separated the entry from the corridor. On the left was a hat stand whose curved arms held two men's caps and a violet scarf that did not belong there. It had a touch of perfume about it, though the rain had damped it down. A bell on a spring had jangled at his entrance. Now a woman appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron and patting her hair with the other hand. She was 50, perhaps a little more, with a tidy figure and the controlled face of one who lives by keeping small things in order. "Madame Aubrey," she introduced herself, her voice careful and a shade too bright. "Chief Inspector, thank you for coming." Her gratitude was not theatrical. He sensed she meant it. Behind her shoulder, a brown door with frosted glass read "Cuisine," and somewhere in it a casserole simmered. Leeks, he thought, and something fatty that would keep a man content on a rainy night. "Janvier?" Maigret asked. "In the room," she said, lowering her voice, as if the dead could be disturbed by volume. They moved down the corridor together, her steps precise, his unhurried, the old carpet yielding softly underfoot. On the wall, the framed lithographs, views of Paris seen by a provincial who had wanted Paris to be pretty, tilted slightly. She stopped at the third door, which was numbered with brass. The number had been polished more often than the knob. Maigret noticed these attentions without approving or disapproving. There are people who polish what they can. Before they entered, he put a question to her. Not about the body, not yet, but about a thing that had waited in his mind since the "Telephone call, 3 chairs," he said, her mouth pressed tight, as if the phrase itself were impolite. "Yes, it's not right. You keep the furniture count." "Of course," she said, almost offended. 2 chairs to a small room, 3 to the large one at the end, because it has a corner window. Always has been so. When my husband was alive—" She stopped there and gave a small nod toward the door. "You'll see." Inside, the air was faint, with stale smoke and damp wool. Janvier stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his hat on the sill where water had collected and made a dark ellipse in the wood. He straightened when he saw Maigret, but only a little. They understood each other well enough to dispense with ceremony. "Evening, Chief." "Evening, Janvier." The room had the plainness of a modest life, arranged with a certain respect. The narrow bed with a coverlet in a geometric pattern of browns, the washstand with its oval mirror, nicked along the rim, a carafe half full of water beside a glass, with a smear. On the bed lay a man in his late 50s in a blue serge suit that had been carefully brushed but was too tight at the waist and shoulders. His hair was combed, his shoes polished. His face had the mottled stillness that comes when the movements depart and leave a map behind. The tie was loosened, a centimetre only. The kind of man who loosened a tie exactly that much, no more. "Who is he?" Maigret asked quietly. "Registered as Monsieur Girard," Janvier said. "Identity card shows the same. Address in Melun. Clerical work, rail administration." He shrugged lightly. "Heart, the doctor says, no sign of a struggle. Window latched from inside. Door was locked. Madame has a master key." "And the chairs," Maigret said, his eyes travelling to the table. It was round, a little scarred, with a checkered cloth thrown on it. Around it stood 3 chairs, each slightly different from the other, in the way a set of siblings are alike. Not new, not original to the room. One could see on the floor where the legs had worn their habits, 2 sets of little hollows that did not quite match the third. In such rooms, chairs were creatures of habit. "Madame says there should be 2, Janvier said. "There were 3 when I arrived." "Who found him?" "I did," Madame Aubry said from the door. She had not crossed the threshold. "He did not come down for supper. He always came down. I knocked. I used the key when he didn't answer. He was like this. I sent the boy for the police." "You did not move anything." Maigret said, not accusing, simply setting the stone so he could see how it lay. Her eyes flicked to the table quickly. I pushed the chairs back. They were untidy. She coloured a little, ashamed of the confession. I did not think it mattered. It often doesn't, Maigret said with a tone that could be read both ways. He stepped closer to the bed. The dead man's right hand lay over his chest, as if placed there, not dramatically, simply resting. He bent, smelling only the usual soap, the ghost of yesterday's cigarette, damp wool, the faint sweetness that people leave in their clothes over time. Any visitors? He asked without looking around. None that I saw, Madame said. Monsieur Girard was regular. He worked at the station office. He ate at 7. He walked at 8 in the rain with his hat low, and at 9 he returned and sat with a newspaper in the corner of the dining room. He went up at 10 always. He had been here, Maigret asked. 3 weeks, she answered. Only 3. He was not unkind, quiet. He paid on time. Quiet men do not die noisily, he thought. But death, like a jealous neighbor, sometimes finds a reason to knock. He motioned to Janvier and they moved to the window, speaking low. Outside, a man smoked under the awning of the shop across the street, gazing at the rain as if it were a performance. The doctor, Maigret asked. Gone. Certifies natural causes pending the usual. He didn't like the position of the hand, but it could be habit, he said. There's no bruise, no mark. Purpling around the ears. Heart, most likely. And the third chair, Maigret said, almost to himself. The rain made a sound like someone sifting rice along the glass. He turned the key which lay on the table, between thumb and forefinger. It was the kind of key the door expected. Nearby, a black leather wallet rested with the patience of objects. He opened it and found a modest amount of money, a train pass, a small photograph of a young boy in a sailor suit, taken long ago, with the stiff pride in the spine that those pictures stamp on children. Tucked behind the photo was a ticket stub to a cinema on the Boulevard de Strasbourg dated 2 nights ago. In the drawer of the washstand, a spare collar, 2 handkerchiefs with a G embroidered in a hesitant hand, a small tin of lozenges, and a note on hotel stationery. Wednesday at 3. The room with the window. No name, just that, in a rounded, careful script that might have belonged to a schoolteacher. Maigret let the note rest on his palm a moment, as if to feel its temperature. He could hear Madame's breath, light and regular at the door. He could sense Janvier not looking at him but following his gaze. The room with the window, he repeated and glanced at the shutter latch. It was closed. A thin, wet line had formed where the wood met the sill, as if someone had tried to wipe a trickle with the heel of the hand and given up. He sat in one of the chairs, one of the 2 that fitted the floor, and the wood nodded under him in recognition. The third chair wobbled slightly. He turned it with his toe, then lifted it in both hands and set it down in the hollows where a chair had learned to stand. It did not settle. It was a guest here, not a resident. You have another room with 3 chairs, he said to Madame without looking up. Yes, she said quickly. At the end. The corner room, number 7. It is larger. It has 2 windows on the angle. Who lodges there? She hesitated, and in the hesitation was a crease of disapproval. Monsieur Morel, she said. A commercial traveller. He receives visits sometimes. From whom? A lady, she said. The word passed and left behind a whiff of starch. Different ones, but lately, one. Always the same. She leaves before 10. Before Monsieur Girard returned. To sit with his paper, Maigret said, still mild. I am not a gossip, she replied with sudden dignity, and then, calming, but it is my business to know who comes under my roof. It is, he agreed. And tonight? Tonight, no one. Monsieur Morel is away. He left yesterday for Reims. He said 2 days. And the third chair, Maigret said. Where would a third chair come from if one wished to borrow it? From number 7, she admitted, the words small. There are 3, the others have 2, and in the dining room, of course, many, but I count those as separate. When did you last notice the chairs in this room? This afternoon, she said at once. I do the dusting at 3, always at 3. It lets the polish rest before supper. There were 2. So the third arrived after 3, he said, more to settle the thought than to instruct, and his eyes returned to the note to the time written there, Wednesday at 3. "What day is it?" he asked, and he knew, yet he asked because one must let the room and the people inside it speak the obvious in their own voices. "Wednesday," she said, as if sorry for the coincidence. "And who has keys?" "Myself," she said, touching the pocket of her apron. "My boy Gerard, he helps with the bags, and my niece who minds the dining room, and the maid Leah for the linens. But she is simple and honest. She wouldn't. She knows her place." "Of course," he said. "We will speak to them." He rose, his knees telling him what they always told him, and he put the note back in the drawer. He lifted the glass on the washstand. A faint semicircle of lip remained, the kind that water leaves when a man drinks without thinking. He put it down as it had been. "Janvier," he said, "have someone check Morel at Reims. Quietly. And the cinema. I'd like to know who sat with Monsieur Girard 2 nights ago." "Yes, Chief." Janvier's pencil moved. He was content to move where Maigret's eye moved. It was one of the pleasures of working with him. "You will want to speak to my niece," Madame said. "She is in the kitchen. The boy is in the back bringing coal. Leah will come tomorrow at 8, as always." "Not yet," Maigret said. "I would like a look at number 7. She led them down the corridor. The end room had, as promised, 2 windows at the angle of the street. It felt like a room that stood slightly above its station, as a clerk might on his payday. The bed was broader, the carpet newer by a year or 2. On the table, a chessboard pattern of crumbs. Careful hands had brushed them into a tidy constellation. 3 chairs, each with a slight polish along the back from coats that had been hung there, while their owners' shoulders leaned forward over talk or cards or nothing at all. "Locked?" he asked. "When he left," she said. "I opened today. To air. I have done nothing else." He moved among the chairs as if they were people at a bus stop. One had a dark mark along a leg, as if it had been dragged where a radiator pipe had left a kiss of rust. He crouched and rubbed the mark with his thumb. It came away faintly on the skin. He stood and looked toward the door frame of number 5, then back at the hollowed floor in number 5, where 2 chairs had learned to stand, and then at the lay of the corridor carpet between them, where a faintness in the pile suggested weight. Had passed not once but several times. Nothing is so silent as a chair when it is lifted by someone who knows the house well. In the kitchen, where steam had thickened the air and put a glow in the window pane, Madame's niece, a pale young woman, with careful posture and hands that wanted to be small, was drying glasses. She looked at Maigret with an interest she tried to fold away. He asked about the day, the guests, the meals, the weather, and it was only after 3 or 4 questions, each without weight, that he touched the thing he wanted. As a fisherman lets his line drift before drawing it taut. "At 3, you dust," he said to Madame, "and at 3 someone writes to meet in a room with a window." The niece placed a glass down too carefully and left a water ring. She stared at it, then lifted it and wiped the ring with her sleeve. "Monsieur Girard had a visitor," she said suddenly, as if surprised to hear herself. "Not today," she added quickly, frightened by her own daring. "Yesterday." "What time?" Maigret asked gently. "In the afternoon. Around 3. I took up hot water. There was a woman's laugh. I put the pitcher down and left." "How do you know?" "It was number 5. Because I went to number 5, she said, as if the obvious were a trap. He had rung for hot water. He always ring at that time. He shaved then before his walk." "And today?" Maigret asked very softly. She shook her head. "Today, nothing." "A blonde?" He said, not because he knew, but because sometimes asking a color sets a memory in motion. "Dark," she said, "with a scarf. Violet, I think. I smelled it after, in the hall." "Violet," Maigret repeated, thinking of the scarf in the moor entry, its faint perfume struggling against the rain. He looked at Madame, who did not meet his eyes. "Many ladies have scarves," she said. It was not defiance, merely a plea to keep the house from being dirtied by the words they had to use. He nodded. Outside, a train horn curled through the rain and went away. He could see now a little more of the picture. Not the faces, not yet, but the arrangement of chairs around a modest life. A man who lived by routine, a room that had learned his steps, a neighbor room that sometimes lent its furniture to visits that ended before 10, a note that named a time and a window, and a scarf that hadn't gone out in the rain. "We will let him rest for tonight," he said finally. "In the morning a pathologist will look with fresh eyes. In the morning also we will speak again, but with coffee." He gave Madame a kindness in his glance, not pity, not yet, but the kind of consideration that recognizes a woman who polishes brass numbers because there are so few other things in the world that answer to the hand. In the corridor on the way out, he paused at number 5 and looked again at the 3 chairs. He took one, the odd one, and lifted it with the ease of a man accustomed to the weight of wood. He carried it along the hall and set it in number 7. It settled at once into a shallow groove, as if relieved to be home. He stood a moment listening to the house, and the house, like a shy animal, said nothing. Then he put on his hat and stepped out into the rain, where the street lamp shivered, and the smell of onions had gone fainter. And in that soft, stubborn weather, his mind followed a woman with a violet scarf up a back stair at 3 o'clock, and a quiet man laying his right hand above his heart, as if to keep something in. The rain had gentled to a mist by the time Maigret reached home, the kind that clings to a lamp's halo and makes the night feel warm despite the damp. Madame Maigret had left the tart to cool on the counter and placed his slippers by the chair without remark. She knew from the way he held his hat that the evening would remain with him even as he undressed. He ate a thin slice of apple tart, without tasting it, and slept heavily but not deeply, as if his rest were another room in a pension where someone might knock. In the morning, the streets wore a rinsed look. He left early, the sky a lid of pewter over Paris, and found his café already awake. The barman nodded and set the large cup where Maigret liked it. There was a newspaper folded to the crime column, though there would be nothing there yet. He did not read. He watched the door swing and close, watched the men who entered with collars turned up and those who came bareheaded, the clatter of cups, the steam sighing. When he had finished, he phoned the quay and left instructions for Janvier Reims to check on Morel and the cinema on Boulevard de Strasbourg. He did not tell him to hurry. The things worth knowing seldom come faster for being chased. At the pension, the hall smelled of damp wool and coffee. The violet scarf had gone from its hook. Madame Aubry appeared with the composed fatigue of a woman who had cleaned before first light and would keep cleaning until the day itself gave up. Her eyes searched his face in that discreet way the worried have, as if the news might be written there and not spoken at all. "You slept?" she asked, and then shook her head at her own question. "Of course not. One does not sleep after such a thing. Will you have coffee?" "If there is some left from the good pot," he said, allowing a corner of his mouth to move. She poured from the enameled kettle, as if grateful to have a thing to do that was unarguably useful. The pathologist had come and gone, leaving behind the faint odor of disinfectant and a note in a doctor's hand. Heart failure probable, no lesions, no foam in the airways. The right hand on the chest remained an irritation to science, but not an impossibility. Time of death between 9 and 11 last night. "It gives you an hour," Maigret murmured. Not to the doctor, who was already elsewhere, but to the day. He preferred to talk before the routine of the house had quite set like jelly. The boy Gerard, 19 with shoulders that had not decided yet whether to be broad, came first, wiping his hands on a rag that had been a shirt in another life. He was a practical youth, smelling faintly of coal and soap. His respect for the chief inspector had the clean simplicity of someone who has grown up with newspaper pictures of a man in a hat standing in a doorway. "You moved coal last night," Maigret said. "After supper." "Yes, monsieur," the boy said. "For the stove in the dining room and for Madame's room I passed the corridor twice. You notice anything unordinary?" The boy hesitated and then looked almost relieved to confess. "What would have tense weight if kept?" "The chair, monsieur. I saw the chair." "Which chair?" "The odd one, the one from 7. I saw it in the corridor when I went with the scuttle. It was at the turn, near 5. I thought, Leah perhaps, or Mademoiselle Anne," he glanced toward the kitchen where the niece must be moving, "had left it there while they swept. One sometimes leaves a chair to air. I thought nothing. I put down the coal, and when I came back, it was not there." "What time?" He frowned, peering back through the rooms of his evening. 7:30, perhaps nearer to 8. We ate at 7 and Mademoiselle scolded me for the ash on my hands. After I carried coal. Around 8, yes. And after that you did not see it again? No, monsieur. You hear a laugh yesterday afternoon, Maigret said. He did not say the boy had heard it. He left the suggestion like a saucer, and waited to see if the boy set something there. Gerard looked embarrassed, as if having ears had been indiscretion. Women laugh differently, he said simply. This one laughed in her throat. Not loud, I heard it because I stood with the scuttle at the landing. It was number 5. He had rung for hot water. Do you know her? No, Gerard said, with the honesty of the shy. I see her scarf sometimes. It is very violet. Did you see the scarf last night? He shook his head. Only the chairs. Good, Maigret said, and meant it. The boy had given him something solid, disguised as trivial. He sent him back to his coal. Leah arrived at 8, exactly as Madame had promised. She had the stolid, tidy figure of a woman who made rows of plates of folded sheets of hours. Her face, though open, was not eager to invent. She said the room had been right at 3 yesterday. 2 chairs, bed made, cover pulled tight. She dusted, she shook the cloth, she straightened the washstand. She did not go after 3. After 3, she began the dining room, and there was a man who wanted his soup hotter who always said so at 4. Keys? Maigret asked, watching her find the answer rather than recite it. In the drawer under the till, she said. Where they always are. Madame has hers. I take the bundle when I make beds, and when I am done I return them. If I go for water, I leave them in the drawer. I do not carry keys when I carry water. It is unlucky. She said this last with no superstition, as if it were a bit of house grammar, like the way the carpet turned at the corner. And yesterday, she thought. I had them at 3:15 to 4. Then I put them back. I did not touch them again. Who touched the drawer after you? He asked. And Leah looked toward the kitchen, where the niece moved among cups and saucers, with a great care that made small clinks sound like apologies. Mademoiselle Anne set the bill for monsieur. Girard, he pays on Thursdays, she said. She may have opened the drawer to put the chit, I cannot say. When Anne came, she had put on her smaller hands again, and they folded without being asked. He kept his voice light, the way one speaks to a sparrow that one does not wish to startle. The scarf, he said, as if they were talking of a thing that had flown in on a draught and must be guided out. It is yours. For a moment she looked offended, and then she looked only tired of the effort of behaving. It is mine, she said. My cousin sent it from Poitiers at Christmas. It smells of violets because the paper in the box smelled. So and the scarf kept it. You left it in the hall last night. I came in from the shops with my coat wet and put it there to dry. Her eyes lifted and then lowered. I forgot it. Yesterday at 3, you took up hot water to number 5. You heard a woman laugh. I did not go in, she said quickly, ashamed or proud, he couldn't say which. I put the pitcher and left. I keep my eyes on the tray. Madame says... She stopped, and the corner of her mouth tried not to move. Madame says, many good things, he agreed. And last night? I saw nothing, she said. I laid the table. I served. I cleared. At 8, Monsieur Girard went out as he always did. At 9, he returned and sat by the fern with his newspaper. He did not finish. His beer. He went up early, 9:45 perhaps. He always took the paper. This time he left it. What happened at 9:30, he asked, as if it were a silly riddle one told a child. She coloured. Nothing happened. I only remember because I looked at the clock and thought of my cousin's letter, and that I had not yet written back. Good, he said again, because small anchors keep a memory from drifting. If the woman comes again, you will tell Madame and Madame will tell me. She will not come again, Anne said in a low voice that surprised them both. She turned away and began to polish an already polite glass. In number 5 the bed had been stripped. The room looked denser without the small human disorder. He stood by the table with its 2 rightful chairs and sensed the absence of the third like the quiet, after a word one expected to hear. He sat and drew on his pipe, though he did not light it, a habit that gave him time without costing him anything. The note in the drawer waited, round script facing down, as if a hand had meant to hide not the message but its neatness. At the station office, the rail administration's corridors gave the impression of having been built to store hats, rather. Then ideas. People moved quietly. Trays of papers balanced like offerings. A supervisor with a mustache that had learned to be the senior in the room received him with that mixture of respect and defensiveness bureaucrats keep for policemen. "Yes, monsieur." "Girard," he said, and his voice arranged the name into a file. "Punctual. 17 years at Malin, transferred here 3 months ago. Reliable, not brilliant. He took his lunch from home in a little tin. He stayed late when asked. He did. Not talk politics." "Friends?" Maigret asked, looking at the supervisor's hands to see if they knew how to hold anything other than paper. "People nod," the man said with the faintest impatience. "This is not a club." He sat at the window the last half hour. To check the freight register. He did not flirt with Mademoiselle Roux in accounting, which she did not notice. Did he ever leave at 3? Maigret asked, and the supervisor's moustache stiffened again. "At 3, he said, as if pronouncing an absurdity. On Wednesdays he left at 3. He had permission. He returned at 5. He claimed an appointment, medical, a specialist, he once said. He provided no note, but he was punctual in leaving, punctual in returning. It is easier to grant a punctual request than to refuse it and be forced to watch the sulks of a man who is late." "Thank you," Maigret said, and meant it. Outside, the Boulevard de Strasbourg carried a river of umbrellas. The cinema had a lobby with a mirror that made people appear more certain of their plans. A girl at the ticket desk, with hair too elaborate for morning but exactly right for her, chewed at her lip when she tried to remember. "Tuesday," she said. "He sits 3rd row from the back, aisle seat. He likes the detective reels. He comes, alone usually. Last Tuesday he had a lady with him, small, dark. They did not speak during. After, she took his arm like someone crossing a street. She smiled, but it was not unkind. People are tender after the pictures. Do you know?" "Hurt?" he asked. "Only from seeing," she said. "She wears a violet scarf sometimes, but many do." He walked then, because it was the way he thought best, and because 2 things wandered in his head like cats who would not be shooed: an odd chair standing in a corridor at 7:30, and a man who left at 3 each Wednesday claiming something vague that had regularity. A woman who laughed in her throat in a small room where a man shaved carefully before his walk. He pictured the right hand on the chest, not a dramatist's hand, only a habit. A man who had learned to ease, a flutter with his palm. He imagined, cautiously because imagining can be vanity, that someone had sat with him at that table under the checkered cloth, and that 3 chairs had been necessary not because of abundance, but because 2 of those who sat did not wish to sit close. Back at the quay, Janvier was waiting with a notebook damp at the edges. "Morel is in Reims," he said. "Checked in yesterday, left this morning for Troyes. The hotel keeper says he took his supper with a salesman for bicycles and went to bed at 11. He presents a life like a sample case. Nothing missing, nothing exciting. He will be back tomorrow night." And the cinema. "The usher knows our man, with a woman last Tuesday, dark, headscarf." She waited for him under the awning after. They walked toward the canal. He bought her roasted chestnuts from the cart, though it is out of season. Janvier lifted an eyebrow. "A romantic, perhaps." "Perhaps," Maigret said. "Or perhaps he bought them because he did not know what else to say." "Do we speak to Madame about the scarf?" Janvier asked, his glance a shade mischievous. "Later," Maigret said. "A scarf is only a scarf until someone refuses to take it back." They sat a moment in the office that smelled of wet wool and ink. Through the glass of the door he could see a clerk rubbing a stain on his sleeve, with a persistence that made the stain darker. He returned his eyes to the note copied on a sheet. "Wednesday at 3. The room with the window. There are many." "Rooms with windows in Paris," Janvier said, not contradicting, merely making a catalogue of the day's obstacles. "Not in this house," Maigret replied softly. "In this house there is one that is known as such, and a man who at 3 had leave to go where men pretend to be cured. He put on his coat again until it settled around him like an old truth. 'We will wait for Morel,' he said, and 'we will see if a woman comes to ask after a chair that has wandered.' In the meantime, his eyes went to the rain that had begun again, a fine, soft sift. 'Let us drink something warm, and let the house down the street decide what it wants, to tell us before night falls. It will speak better then.' On the way out, he passed the telephone and, on impulse that was not impulse at all but the sort of domestic tug he trusted, dialed home. "They sent pears with the fish," Madame said by way of greeting. She knew. He was listening even when he said nothing. "It is strange, but not unpleasant. Keep the pears," he said. "We may need them." And he hung up, smiling to himself at the senselessness that calmed him. It was not pears he needed, but a remark like that, a small thing turning in his mind like a key. As he walked back, into the wet light, he thought of how chairs travel in houses, and how some objects, when misplaced, make more noise in the soul than a shout. He had learned to wait beside that noise without tapping his foot. The house with the corner windows would sooner or later look up and meet his eye. By late afternoon, the district had settled into that particular tempo that comes when the day has spent itself and is waiting for the lamps. The pavement outside, the pension shone with a skin of damp that made footsteps sound closer together than they were. Maigret took a place at the café opposite, where the glass sweated on the inside and the zinc counter held the ghost marks of 100 cups. He did not open a notebook. He drank slowly and watched how the house breathed when it thought no one watched, the door that fell shut without quite latching, the net curtain at the kitchen window that moved with steam, the boy Gérard passing, with a sack of potatoes over one shoulder, like a promise he meant to keep. He had told Janvier to let the day run. He had told the pathologist they would talk tomorrow. He had sent no one clattering the stairs with questions. A house is like a person. You learn more by letting it think it is alone. Around 4, the light outside went from tin to pewter. The butcher's boy whistled as if to make himself larger in the street. A woman in a green coat tried the bell twice, impatient as a cat. At 1:30, a man in a navy overcoat paused under the awning and looked up at the windows with the proprietary air of someone who had a habit in that house. He did not go in. He lit a cigarette, watched the smoke, flicked the ash too often, and then walked away toward the station, his shoulders carrying nothing. Longnon arrived, shoulders hunched against rain that had not fallen for an hour. He wore his usual expression, the slight squint of a man who mistrusts horizons, and his hat had taken on water long ago and decided to keep it. "You've got me on a heart," he said without greeting, lowering himself onto the stool beside Maigret, with the weight of a man sitting on an opinion. "In August," he added, as if the month were an insult someone had thrown at him, "there will be a form for this heart, and another form to say the first form was filled." Maigret made a vague sound that contained amusement and sympathy in equal parts. The waiter set down a glass for Longnon and went away. Through the window, Madame Aubry's niece, Anne, crossed the hall and vanished toward the kitchen. She moved with the care of someone who has been told since childhood not to drop things. "Melun sent an answer," Longnon said, producing, with an air of distaste, a folded letter that had made its envelope transparent with damp. "Girard, widower. Wife dead 8 years, pneumonia. One son, Antoine, 21, in the army now. Girard worked steady. Transferred to Paris 3 months ago. The neighbors say he made no trouble, which is high praise there. He paid the rent. He walked after supper. He carried his hat properly. He took a swallow and then looked into the glass as if it had said something out of turn. No mistress, no card games, no enemies. They always write no enemies when they don't know." "Where was the boy as a child?" Maigret asked. Not because it mattered yet, but because family histories are like furniture in rooms. You bump into them if you don't know where they are. "With a cousin when the mother was ill," Longnon said. "Back with the father after. Nothing special, they say. The son writes seldom. The father keeps stamps under a saucer so he won't forget. The neighbor laughs at that. On Wednesdays he left at 3, Maigret murmured. "So the supervisor says," Longnon returned. "A specialist, with no address and no receipts. I too have a specialist on Wednesdays. I call him my bed." Maigret's mouth tugged. He watched the front of the pension again. The violet scarf had not returned to the peg. A shadow moved behind the frosted kitchen door. The kettle breathed. The smell of boiling coffee came across the street, even through the cafe's own steam, a smell that always, no matter the house, carried a note of urgency, as if coffee were made most earnestly when something had gone wrong. "Morel?" he asked. "In Champagne," Longnon said dourly. He sells bicycle lamps and the idea of light to men who have always had darkness. He returns tomorrow. The hotel there says he slept at 11 and snored. I shall buy his salesman a medal for remembering the hour." The remark passed and left them with the small silence of men who are content not to talk. A woman in a blue dress crossed with a basket. She stopped to speak to Anne on the step, a quick exchange, the kind that stings and is over. Anne's hand went to her scarfless throat, as if she had remembered she had forgotten something. She went back in. "I do not like the hand," Lognon said abruptly, as if he had been resisting saying it for an hour and could not any longer. "On the chest, men do it, yes, but I do not like it." "No," Maigret said, "nor do I." He finished his beer and stood, the chair legs making a noise like a cough against the tile. "Walk with me," he said, and they crossed to the pension. In the hall, the smell of the house wrapped them: soap, onions, damp wool, the faint trace of the violet that had clung to air longer than cloth. Madame Aubry came forward, wiped her hands as if her palms had sinned, and stood brave. If she was afraid of the police, of authority, she hid it stolidly under the apron. "Madame," Maigret said in a voice that softened by a degree, "may we trouble your ledger?" She produced it with the pride of a merchant who knows her lines add to the right column. The entries held steady, neat, small numbers, with tails like well-behaved cats. Morel, room 7, had been absent on 2 Wednesdays in the last month. On those days, there was a smudge beside the 7, as if someone had propped the book open while thinking. On 2 other Wednesdays, the page had a faint grit, a polish residue, caught in the crease. "Do you let rooms by the hour, madam?" Lognon asked with his particular dryness that could be mistaken for rudeness by the amateur. She met his eyes squarely. "No, monsieur. This is a respectable place." "And yet sometimes," Maigret put in mildly, "respectable people also need hours." He did not smile because he did not wish to force her to either. "I air the rooms," she said, defensive because she had nothing to confess. "In the afternoons, if a gentleman has a friend to visit and they wish to talk away from the dining room. I am not a jailer, but I am not a fool either." He let it rest. He asked for the key to 7 and went up with Lognon. The corner room looked different in afternoon light, with the 2 windows taking the pallor in and making of it something dignified. He ran a finger along the inside sill, lifted a crumb of tobacco, the pale kind some men preferred when they wished to be thought continental. Girard had smoked the other sort. Morel? He did not know. He bent to the 3rd chair. The prodigal returned, and set it a little aside, then back, listening without ears to whether the floor knew it. It did. "Look," Lognon said, surprising him with the gentleness with which he pointed. In the corner near the radiator pipe, a faint oval mark on the wallpaper at shoulder height, blurred as if someone had leaned there often, not with carelessness, but with the patience of waiting. A person who stood by the window and watched for someone from the street below would lean there. He imagined a woman in a dark skirt, her scarf momentarily untied. He imagined her laughing low in her throat, not because anything was funny, but because laughter makes a bridge when words do not know how to. Downstairs, Anne had laid out clean glasses in a line too straight for accident. She watched them as if they might scarper. When she saw them, she steadied herself and looked at Maigret's tie, not his face. "A man telephoned," she said before he could ask. "He asked for Monsieur Girard. I told him no such person was able to take a call. He hung up, no name. The line was from a kiosk. The rattle sounded like it." "At what time?" he asked. She closed her eyes as if behind the lids there were a clock. 4:20, she said, "because the kettle was at the scream, and Madame called that the boiled water was for the rooms at 1:30. I looked at the stove." "Did he ask twice?" Lognon put in, the impatience tied up with something like pity. "No, only once. And the way he asked—" She hesitated. "The way he asked, he did not expect to be refused. He had called before, I think. His voice thought it had a right." "A right to whom?" Maigret asked, and she made the smallest movement with her shoulders, miserable at the vastness of the answer. "To the man who left at 3, she said at last, without irony, and went back to her glasses. In the office behind the dining room, the drawer under the till squeaked when opened. The squeak was new, a complaint of wood against wood because of the damp. Inside, the bundle of keys with a green label for each number, a roll of stamps under a rubber band. Stamps were always under rubber bands in houses like this, and a small packet of papers with string, the ends chewed by habit. He did not touch the packet. He looked at Madame and lifted his brows. She shook her head quickly, not hers. He took it out and laid the string neatly beside it. A few receipts for coal and potatoes, a letter with no stamp, left by hand, folded twice, bearing only Poor Anne in that same rounded hand as the note in Gerard's drawer. He set it back as if it burned. It was not for him. He did not say her name. He simply closed the drawer again, and the squeak sounded like a complaint, and then stopped. At 5, the street changed key. Men with office shoulders appeared, their hats saying who they were, their pace saying who waited. A girl ran with a loaf under her arm, its paper darkening where butter had kissed it. The air took on a thin sweetness from a pastry oven down toward the station. Maigret returned to the café, asked for coffee. The good pot, he said, because he knew they understood, and set his pipe beside the saucer. There is a thin wire that runs through a day like this. You pluck it too hard and it breaks. You do not pluck it, and it never sounds. At 6, the telephone rang in the pension, and he saw Anne, through the glass, hesitate and then walk faster. She put a hand to her hair without vanity. She listened. She said yes, and then nothing, lips slightly parted. Then she said no, in a way that made Madame stand up straight in the kitchen, as if someone had stood on the train brake. She hung up gently and did not move for a second. Then she lifted a towel and began to dry a cup that had been dry. Maigret did not go in. He let the cup be dried twice. The thing one says after a phone call belongs to the air first, then to the room, then to the listener last. He watched the door. The rain had come back, a patience of droplets that made collars rise. At 1:30, a woman turned the corner from the station with the forward tilt of someone who has walked this walk too often to notice it. She was not young in the way girls are young, but she had that alertness some women keep when they have always had to be their own witness. Dark hair under a hat too modest to be called a hat, a coat cinched carefully at the waist, a scarf. Violet, yes, but the violet of paper that has already given its scent away. She paused under the awning, pressed her lips together and entered. He did not follow at once. He let her climb the 2 steps. He let the bell jangle. He let Anne come to the desk and lift her eyes, and just for a breath, let their faces arrange themselves into expressions for one another. Madame came from the kitchen and stopped, her hands tightening on a cloth that had been a cloth long before she was a proprietor. The woman spoke. He could not hear the words, but he knew their shape. Monsieur Girard. The name in her mouth had the softness of a word used at home. Anne said something. The woman did not sit. She did not take off her gloves. She simply stood with the politeness of someone who knows politeness is the last defense people have against certain facts. Then Maigret crossed and went in, his hat coming off in the old way his hand had learned. Up close, the scarf's violet had indeed fled, but the air around her still held a memory of it. She turned at the movement and studied his face the way people study weather. "I am Chief Inspector Maigret," he said, and the way her shoulders altered told him she had known there would be a policeman, but she had not wanted there to be this particular one, who did not hurry, who did not fill silences for her. "How you have come about, Monsieur Girard?" Her mouth trembled and then held. "Yes," she said, "I have come to ask if he left something for me." She did not look at Anne, though the girl's hands had gone still, her fingers pressing the edge of the desk as if to feel what was real. "What is your name?" he asked, and his voice did not carry any of the door-bolts of officialdom. He asked as one asks a question in a kitchen. "Claire Martin," she said. It was a name that could belong to anyone. "I work at the school, at the end of the street," she added, and a tired, miserable humor crept into her words. The kind that people use when explaining the obvious has become a duty. "I teach arithmetic." "On Wednesdays," he said, almost like an aside. "You finish early." She nodded once. The glove on her left hand creaked at the knuckle. "At 2, she said. "Sometimes, if there is a meeting, at 3. Often, at 2. "And sometimes you came here," he went on, "to the room with the window. Color came and left her face without leaving any behind. "I came to talk," she said quickly, as if to hold back laughter that would not be laughter at all. "It is not, we are not—" She stopped, because words have to choose which burden to carry, and sometimes they refuse. "It rains," Maigret said to relieve her. "There is noise in this quarter. People need quiet to discuss arithmetic." She looked at him with a gratitude she hated to feel. "We did nothing wrong," she said, and then, almost angrily at herself, "We did not mean to do anything wrong." "And yesterday?" he asked. "Yesterday you did not come." "No," she said. "I was expected and I was not expected. I waited. I do not know why I waited. Then I telephoned," she added, and a little start went through Anne's shoulders, behind the desk. "From the kiosk. A man answered and said the person I asked for could not take a call. He spoke as if he were drying a cup." Anne's breath made a small sound, the kind that does not reach the throat. Madame Aubry looked from one to the other, and then to Maigret as if he knew how to rescue people from such small disasters. "You knew him from Melun?" he asked Claire. "Martin." She shook her head. "From here, from the cinema. I saw him at the pictures. He looked like a man who didn't like to be alone in the dark. We walked once. Then on a Wednesday he said there was a—" She searched for the word and would not take the one that lay nearest. "A quiet place to talk. Only that." "And the third chair?" he asked, almost gently now, as if she had earned the right to be asked anything. A tear surprised her and made her blink with annoyance. "For me," she said, "and for the way we sat, we did not know how to be near, so we put a chair between." She gave a small, choked laugh that was not a laugh at all. Arithmetic. He let the silence be. It was the kind that settles on a table after coffee, when people understand more than they intend. Outside, the light failed to the level where the street lamps justify themselves. The house seemed to draw its shoulders in. On the stair, a tread. In the corridor, the faint swish of a skirt. In the hall, the kettle beginning again, because kettles always begin again. "Will you tell me," Claire said, and she did not raise her voice, "if he suffered?" "No," Maigret said. "He did not. He did not add that science had not liked the hand. He did not say what he had thought at the window. He did not say that a man who buys chestnuts out of season is already past the arithmetic." She nodded. She took off her gloves and then put them back on because there was nothing to hold. "I have his—" she began, and stopped, then tried again. "He asked me to keep a thing for him, a letter. He said if a day came when he could not collect, I should burn it." She looked at Maigret's face to see if this was crime. "I did not burn it," she said helplessly. "I do not know what the day is." "We will decide the day together," he said. "Tomorrow, come in the morning at 9. Bring what you have. We will talk in the room with the window if you like." A tremor went through her mouth and steadied. "Thank you," she said. She looked at Anne then, as if she had finally been allowed to. The two women did not speak. Each simply acknowledged that the other had stood near a door and listened, and had not entered. Claire turned, the violet scarf moving, now hardly more than a memory, and went out into the rain that had begun again in earnest, the drops fat and few like the first words after a silence. Longnon exhaled as if he had been holding his breath. "For an hour." "A schoolteacher," he muttered. "And chairs." "And chairs," Maigret agreed. He watched the door close on the weather and felt the small change inside himself that comes when the picture on the wall tilts and the room is no longer quite the same. The house at last had looked up. It would speak better now. Tomorrow they would let it say what it had been trying to hold back, not a secret about evil, but something smaller and more stubborn, about pride, about loneliness, about the way people set a chair between them when they cannot yet trust their hands. The city had slept poorly. When Maigret opened the window, the morning smelled of yesterday's rain and metal rails. Madame Maigret, sleeves rolled, was cutting pears into a bowl in steady crescents. He watched the knife for a moment and, because sometimes, his mind stepped from one small domestic thing to another without warning, said, "When people put a hand here," he touched his breastbone, "do they always mean their heart?" "Sometimes," she said, not looking up. "Sometimes they mean they are keeping something in." She wiped the blade on a towel as if to erase the thought. "There is coffee. The remark went with him the way a scent does, and he carried it down the stairs and along the boulevard to the pension, where the hall had been scrubbed early, the smell of soap ruling for the moment over onions and damp. He had asked Claire Martin for 9, and precisely at 9 she arrived with the exactness of a teacher. She wore the same coat, buttoned one lower than last night, as if she had decided to breathe. In her gloved hands was a long envelope that had been opened and closed often without ever quite being shut. They did not go into the dining room, where the clatter would make speech into effort. They went to the corner room with the 2 windows, because she had suggested it in a voice that wondered if that were permitted, and because Maigret understood there are rooms that ask to be part of a story once they've been told it exists. He set a chair for her and took one of the others. The third remained between, unoccupied, performing its curious duty of making closeness honest. "It is not for me to keep," she said, placing the envelope on the tablecloth with both palms, as if returning a borrowed book. "He gave it to me a fortnight ago. He said if a day came when he could not, he used the word collect. He did not say return. If he could not collect it, I was to burn it. I thought perhaps a policeman should become the day instead." He unsealed the flap the way a doctor touches skin, without haste, without the sort of delicacy that is only display. Inside was a letter in the same round hand as the note in Girard's drawer, a hand that put its weight on the downstrokes as if to keep everything from floating off the page. He read it in silence. It did not take long. There were no phrases to admire, only sentences that went where they had to. He said he had been unwell, and episodes, he called them, and that on Wednesdays he saw a man who listened but gave little in return, after which he felt braver. He asked Claire to forgive him for what he had not asked of her, to be patient without a promise. He said that if he did not come some evening, there was a small savings book at the post office in his name, and a note in his wallet that told his son, Antoine, where to find it. If anyone asked, she must say they were friends from the pictures. He added one absurdly practical line that made Maigret's mouth twitch. "If I do not come, tell Madame to keep my room another week paid. I don't like people to be at a loss." There was a folded slip enclosed, a post office receipt for a deposit, modest but large enough to make respectable people careful. No names beyond his own, no mention of anyone else, nothing of a secret that would justify fire. "You did not burn it," Maigret said. "It was not a question. I did not know whether I am a person who burns things," she said, and then, as if the confession had embarrassed her, she added in a tone that tried to make it practical, "There is another. For Mademoiselle Anne. He asked me to write it. I put it in the drawer under the till yesterday. He said she had been kind, that she thought he was less alone than he was, and that this kindness is expensive in a house like this." He looked at the letter in his hand, then at the window that had more light than warmth. "What did you write to Anne?" "That it is not her fault to know what she knows," she said, "and that when people borrow a chair, it is not a scandal, until someone trips over it." Her mouth made a small apologetic curve. "He said she is the sort who would blame herself. He was right." "You did not come yesterday," he said. "I waited too long to leave the school," she said. "A parent wants to know if her son can become an engineer when he cannot add. By the time I walked to the kiosk, it was foolish to go anywhere." "4:20 you called here," he said. A man answered. He said no one could take the call. Her eyebrows moved, and with them something in her chest. "A man." I thought a girl. Perhaps the line distorted. Perhaps I only heard myself and decided to be denied. She lifted the envelope's empty mouth with 2 fingers and let it fall as if testing its weight. "You see, it is arithmetic one does on air." "You and Monsieur Girard didn't meet anyone else here?" He asked it, as if the answer would be indifferent news. "No," she said simply. "He told me once that the man at 7, Morel, was the sort who wears scent and thinks it makes him invisible. But he was amused, not angry. We used the room when it was free in the afternoons, and in the evenings we sat in the dining room with a paper between. He said he did not want to steal anyone's life for his own." He folded the letter and slid it back. The chair between them remained, and he found himself grateful for it. Small decencies are furniture in their way. Without them, people bruise themselves on air. He stood, and when she did too, he said, "You will come back at noon? I may need you to say again what you have said, and you will say it the same way. It helps." She nodded. "I teach the same lesson 3 times a week," she said. "I can say anything twice." On the landing he found Janvier, who had the air of a man who has learned something that is not large, but has a way of finding the center of a day. "Chief," he said, keeping his voice low because the house had become a room in which one does not raise one's voice. "Morel telephoned just now from Troyes. He says the weather is sulking there and he will return by the late train. He arrives at 9. He asked, politely, too politely, if his room will be aired." "And last night's 6 o'clock call?" Maigret asked, as if it were a card he had put aside and now wanted to play. "Not Morel," Janvier said. "The kiosk near the canal. The boy at the tobacco stand swears it was a man in a cap who smells of machine oil. Asked for Girard in a confident voice, then hung up when told he could not be reached." He flicked his eyes. "Son, a colleague, a man who doesn't like to give his name to counters." "Machine oil," Maigret repeated softly. "At the station office, the railmen wear their smell like a badge, but they do not telephone at 6 unless trains have taught them punctuality in everything." He let the thought go and held out his hand for the small scrap of paper Janvier produced. A name and a telegraph office. A note that a wire had been sent last week to Melun. "To Antoine," Janvier said, saying only, "Wednesday, same hour. Courage. Signed, G." He stood, looking at those words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less plain. Courage had a different taste in workmen's mouths than in poets. He put the slip away. "The son is on leave?" "Possible," Janvier said. "The colonel in Melun is the sort who cannot remember faces but remembers papers. He will answer, after lunch." They walked the corridor again to number 5. Maigret sat where Girard must have sat and tried not to imagine and failed. The right hand on the chest. Habit, or the gesture of a man who had learned the sound his heart makes when it reminds him the body is not obedient. The tie loosened by a centimeter, the glass with the pale ring where water had dried. He went down on one knee and looked under the bed. A suitcase lay there, the sort that has been mended more often than it has been admired. Inside, shirts folded not neatly, but with the conscientiousness of a man who has learned late. At the bottom, under the shirts, a tin with lozenges, and another, with buttons, and beneath those, the post office savings book, exactly where he had said it would be. He slipped it out, weighed its thriftiness in his palm, slid it back. Nothing missing, no sign of fingers that had been hurried. He closed the case and let himself listen. The house moved in little noises, the kettle's sibilant breath, the brush being knocked against a pan, a step that hesitated and then decided to continue. He went down to the office where the drawer under the till squeaked. He opened it and took out the letter addressed Pour Anne. He looked at Madame. "May I?" he asked, which was not a police question, but a house one. She inclined her head, then looked away so as not to see what she had permitted. The letter was short. It was in the same round hand. It thanked Mademoiselle for allowing the small kindness of afternoons, and said that sometimes, when one is asked to carry a thing, with 2 hands, it is better to put a chair under it. "Do not worry for me," the last line read. "I am not unhappy. I am only late to understand what people do naturally." He replaced it and shut the drawer. The squeak made the same complaint. Anne stood in the doorway, her fingers worrying the corner of her apron into a cord. She had the look of someone who thinks she has broken a thing that cannot be repaired. "It is kind," Maigret said, as if they were speaking of a casserole sent to a sick neighbor. "It does not accuse you, mademoiselle. It thanks you." She swallowed and nodded, and then, as if something in her had decided it could afford truth now, she said, "Last night before supper, I took the chair from 7 and I left it near 5 to carry a pail. I meant to put it back. I forgot until I saw it gone. I thought—" She lifted her hands and let them fall. "I thought perhaps he had—" She could not say invited. The syllables seemed indecent in her mouth. "When I cleared after, I put it with the others, and I said nothing. This is a house. We do not make a list of what people intend." "What time?" he asked. "Near 8, she said, because the soup was just on, and Madame was scolding because the spoons had spotted. I thought, I will put the chair back when I have dried my hands. Then I forgot my hands. And you saw no one go up with him at 9? "No," she said. He nodded to me. He took his paper, as always. He climbed the stairs. He walked slowly, she added after a pause. Lately he walked as if he were carrying something that might spill. He thanked her with his eyes. Pity can make people lie. Respect makes them exact. By noon, the sky had brightened the way tin brightens when one wipes it. It was not a change in weather so much as a decision to pretend. Claire returned with a small square parcel wrapped in brown paper, the sort of parcel that makes a man look more respectable, not less. "He asked me to keep this as well," she said. "I did not open it. It is only a bundle of letters. I think, not mine." "Then not ours," Maigret said, and for a moment the relief in the room was a third presence. Lunch at the cafe opposite was the sort that comes on a tray because one has not liked the idea of sitting among voices. As he ate, forks making the discreet music of noon, he watched the pension receive its day's regulars. Two commercial men in hats tried not to stand too close to their own cases. A woman with a baby on her hip asked for a glass of water for the baby and a small beer for herself, and felt compelled to say to no one that the doctor had said beer was milk in a better mood. The house did not argue. It absorbed. After, the colonel in Mélin telephoned with military briskness that had not survived peacetime untouched. "Antoine Girard has leave in Paris until Friday," he said. He applied properly and returned. "Properly last time. I do not expect him, therefore, to behave improperly now. If he has done so, it will be on your conscience, not mine." He hung up with the pride of a man who has transported a burden. So the son had been in the city, a boy who had a wire that said, "Wednesday, same hour, courage," and a father who loosened his tie by one notch and put his right hand where men put it when they are keeping something in. A kiosk near the canal, machine oil in the smell, and a voice that had expected to be connected. He went back to number 5 and sat again, his pipe unlit and nonetheless making the air taste a little of smoke. He could see now a different arrangement, of 3 chairs, the father in his place by the table, the son opposite. The third chair between like a barricade neither had the nerve to remove. He could imagine the words they had, and the many they did not. Money, the son's leave, the father's Wednesdays, the idea of a woman who taught arithmetic, and the thought that one cannot learn so late without making someone else add for you. The sous. Hand on the chest made a different sense in that light. Not theatrical, not arranged, but the unconscious reflex of a man who had felt the flutter rise and had laid his palm against it the way people hush a child without intending to. No poison, the doctor had said, no bruises. A time of death that stretched just long enough to include a quarrel too quiet to be called one, and an apology too small to carry upstairs. The third chair was suddenly the most human thing in the room. 2:45, when a school would be letting out, when the day would begin to pour itself toward evening again, the telephone on the desk jangled. Anne lifted it and listened, and for a moment forgot to breathe. Then she said, "Yes," and held the receiver out to Maigret with both hands as if it weighed more than the instrument allowed. A young man's voice, tight where it meant to be steady, said, "I am Antoine Girard. I am in Paris." The voice made no apology for calling. "If I must come, I will come. But I would rather meet you somewhere that is not that house. I don't like the smell of it." He did not mean onions or soap. "Come across the street," Maigret said, looking through the doorway at the cafe where the zinc counter had the patient shine it always had. "We will sit somewhere with windows. Bring what you have. We will not rush." There was a small noise, agreement or despair, hard to say, and the line went dead in the way lines do when the person at the other end is young and has not learned to put the receiver down gently. He looked at Anne, who had the color of paper left in a drawer, and at Madame, who had taken the cloth in her hands and begun to fold it for the third time without making it any smaller. "Madame," he said, "this evening you will have a guest in 7. The commercial traveler returns. See that there are 3 chairs. People forget themselves less when there is furniture." She gave him a look that, in a different life, might have been a smile. "There are always chairs, monsieur." "Le commissaire," she said, "it is the sitting that is difficult." He took his hat, and as he crossed to the cafe he saw the reflection of the house in the cafe window, 2 stories tall and quiet, with a corner room that kept half its light for later. He knew the talk to come would not be about guilt in the Way the newspapers like it. It would be about pride and lateness, and the arithmetic of two men who could not yet bring themselves to sit closer than a chair apart. And he felt, as he pushed open the cafe door, the small certainty that the weather would turn again by nightfall, and that the rain, when it returned, would sound like someone pouring coffee in another room. Antoine arrived with the kind of quick, squared step that belongs to young men who have been told where to be and when, and have spent months learning to dislike waiting rooms. He was not in uniform. He wore a jacket that had been brushed too hard at the elbows, a shirt that had begun to fret along the collar, trousers polished shiny at the knees by habit. His hair kept its barracks memory even without the cap. When he took the chair, he set his hands flat on the table, as if to show they were empty. There was a faint black half-moon under one nail, and the smell of machine oil came with him, honest and not apologetic. Maigret had chosen a place by the window where the light came tiredly, and the world outside moved at a pace that forgave long silences. He had asked for coffee for both of them, and when the cups came he pushed one toward the young man without commentary. Antoine lifted it, drank, burnt his mouth a little, and accepted the fact without gesture. "I don't like that house," he said at once, without greeting. "It smells of soup that has waited too long and of wet wool, and something else, flowers that aren't there." "Violets," Maigret said. "A scarf." Antoine looked at him sharply and then looked away. "I thought so," he said flatly. "I don't know her name, I don't need to." "Claire," Maigret said, in a tone that might have been anyone's mother pronouncing a weather report. "She teaches arithmetic at the end of the street." Antoine's jaw tightened and then released. "He wrote to me," he said. "Last week, Wednesday, same hour, courage. I took 2 days. I am not stationed very far. I came to see what courage meant." He gave a small contemptuous sound that had less contempt in it than he wanted. "I telephoned yesterday at the kiosk by the canal. I asked for him. A girl told me he could not be reached. I hung up. I don't say please to people who hold a wire." "You came by the house?" "I went at 8, he said. "I stood across from the door. Men went in who looked like they would eat soup, however it tasted. A boy carried potatoes. After a time I went in. There was a chair in the corridor, an extra one. I put it under my arm because it annoyed me to see it stand there as if no one needed it. I climbed. I knocked. He opened and stood aside. He drank again, and this time let the heat sit in his mouth before swallowing. It was like any room he would have, he said, with scorn that tried to hide something gentler. He had put his things honest on their places. He had loosened his tie a little, because he had seen men do it who relax. There was water in the glass. I put the chair down and did not bring it close. We sat like this. He placed his hand between the cups, palm flat, as if to mark the distance. He said, "You look thin," and I said, "You look old." Then we both pretended it was a joke, he added, as if ashamed. "At what time?" 10 to 9, he said. "I saw the clock in the hall. It has a second hand that limps." "You stayed how long?" "Until just before 10, he said. "It was not long enough, and it was too long," he added, and the sentence embarrassed him. He wanted to talk about money. He glanced up quickly to see if that made him vulgar in the older man's eyes, and then away again when he found only interest. He said, "There is a little in the post office." He said if I wanted to take the course for driving engines when I am done with this, there would be something to begin with. I told him I don't need him to begin. He said it made him feel as like a father. He finished, clumsy with the word. "And Claire?" Maigret said very lightly, "the way one touches the back of a hand to feel if a fever is gone." Antoine's face tightened again. "He used another word," he said. "He said friend. He said he had met someone who liked the pictures and liked to sit by a window. He said he was late to learning something most people know when they're boys, and that it was a ridiculous achievement at his age, but he was proud of it anyway. I said nothing," he added. "I tried, but there was nothing in my mouth that was not ugly, so I said nothing." "And he did not ask your permission?" "No," Antoine said. "He asked for courage, which is worse." The cafe breathed. Around them, cups, the soft thud of a tray set down, the door opening and closing with the sound of a hand on a damp jacket. Maigret did not look away. He watched the place where the young man's fingers met the table and saw how the muscles there stood, and then went soft, like a man holding a tool he has not yet decided to use. He was not well, Antoine said, after a moment more quietly. He was never the sort to complain, but he had begun to do a thing. He put his palm flat against his chest without thinking. This. He did it when he stood up too fast, and when he climbed, and once when... He laughed. He looked afraid when he did it, and then he looked ashamed that I had seen. Yesterday when we sat, he did it twice. I got the water. He told me not to fuss. He said a man he saw had said men make too much of their hearts when they are alone. He laughed when he said it, and then he did the thing again. A man he saw on Wednesdays, Maigret said. A doctor of sorts. I don't know, Antoine said, and now there was a weariness in his voice that made it older than his face. He said it helped to speak. Perhaps it did. He spoke more in that hour than he had spoken to me in a year. He spoke around things, and then he came to them like walking around a table with 3 chairs. He looked down then, almost surprised to hear the words he had made. I put the chair between us, he said. I don't know why. Because I had thought there would be a woman there, and I did not want to be her, he added, with a sudden ugly honesty that made his ears reheat. I thought I was past being childish. I am not. No one is, Maigret said. He said he wanted to introduce me to this... Claire, Antoine went on, and the name came out as if it had to pass through something narrow. Not, he said. Not now, not like a parade. He said, one day when it rains and we have nowhere else to be, perhaps she will come to the cafe and we will sit near and say ordinary things. That will be enough. I said nothing. He asked if I had someone. I said the army is someone. He said that is true until it isn't. He stopped. His face had gone pale under the oil smell. He began to sweat, he said. Not much, just here. He touched his upper lip with the edge of a finger. He put his hand again to his chest, and I stood up, and the chair made a noise against the floor. He said, Sit down, Antoine. Don't make a show, like always, like when I was little. The corner of his mouth tried not to move, and then, did. I sat. I told him not to climb all the stairs after 9. He said he liked the quiet up there when the soup smell goes to sleep. He said he had a headache where you get one from not saying a thing. He said, We will be men next time and manage without furniture. The young man looked at Maigret, and for a moment his eyes were those of a boy waiting for a mark on a paper. I left him, he said. I left him because he made me angry and ashamed, and because he was not being brave the way I thought the letter meant, and because I did not know what to do with my hands. I closed the door. I did not lock it. The key was on the table. I don't know if he locked it after, but it would be like him to make things tidy for other people. What time did you go? 10 to 10, he said. I know because the balladeer at the corner began his stupid song, and he always begins at 10. I went down. In the hall that scarf was not there. A man came in as I went out. He smelled of onions and the butcher. He did not look at me. I stood under the awning until the rain started again, and then I went. I slept badly. In the morning I went to the kiosk to send a wire to my sergeant. He likes things neat. Then I heard in the cafe, he gestured. There are always cafes that give bad news kindly. That a policeman asked after a man in blue serge. I telephoned. You did not go back up, Maigret said. No, Antoine said. I thought if I went back and he was alive we would say the same things again and I would still be angry. And if I went back and he was not... He stopped, shook his head once without dramatics. I did not go back. They let the cups cool. In the glass of the window the pension sat as if listening to them. Across the street, Anne passed in the hall, a roll of cutlery in her arm like a child. She did not look out. Do you want to see the room? Maigret asked softly. Not now, later. A man should have the choice to see where a thing ended. Antoine considered it, and then shook his head with a gratefulness that stung him. I have enough rooms, he said. Barracks, canteens. They all smell the same after a while. You will have to sign a paper, Maigret said, apologizing with the word he could not avoid. There will be a savings book. He left a letter for you in his wallet. It says only where to find things, not what to be. Claire has brought what she had. She will come again at noon. Antoine closed his eyes briefly, as if a light had been too strong. I don't hate her, he said, surprising them both. I wanted to. It would have been easier. But he was proud and ridiculous, as if he had learned to swim at 50 and wanted a certificate. And it is not fair to hate someone who brings that out in a man. The corner of Maigrè's mouth moved. "No," he said. "It is not fair." Antoine stood then, sat again, stood finally. He had the look of a man who had taken off his pack and did not know what to do with his shoulders. He reached into his pocket and brought out a small rectangle of card bent at one corner. "He asked me to take this," he said. "I forgot. It was on the table, a ticket from the cinema. He kept them like boys keep stamps. I took it as if it were a coin." He put it down between them as if it were evidence. It was only a stub, with a date and the word policier smudged, as if someone had handled it in the rain. Maigret did not touch it. "You will come to the quay at 4, he said. "Sign. Then go wherever men go when they don't want to be seen. Tonight go home or to your barracks. Don't come back to the house across the street unless you are invited by yourself." Antoine nodded. He put his hand out awkwardly, as if to a door that might open inward, and then withdrew it, ashamed at the thought that a policeman might be asked to give him a father's gesture. He lifted his chin instead, which is the salute boys make when they are trying not to salute. "He was not a bad man," he said. "No," Maigret said. "He was not." He watched the young man go into the grey light and turn his head once, toward the pension and then away, as if the building might call after him with something he couldn't carry. Janvier slid onto the stool Antoine had left, as if the chair still held the shape of the talk and could be warmed again. "Well?" "He brought the chair in," Maigret said. "He put it between them. They did not shout. He left just before 10. The rest is the heart." "And the hand?" Janvier asked. "A habit," Maigret said, "and perhaps an apology to himself." He finished his coffee, which had gone bitter, and stood. "Morel returns at 9. Let him find his 3 chairs waiting. A man with scent should not be disappointed." "And the woman?" Janvier said. "She will come at noon," Maigret answered. "We will put no furniture between us and the truth. It will come without being dragged." He looked across at the pension. The net curtain at the kitchen window moved, not with steam now, but with the sort of small draught that happens in houses, when someone opens a cupboard they have not opened in years. He felt in himself that little change that precedes rain. Toward evening the weather would turn. People would step closer under awnings, voices would drop. In that weather, men who sold bicycle lamps would come home, and women who taught arithmetic would say a thing they had rehearsed out loud and find that it sounded different in the air. And upstairs in the corner room, 3 chairs would stand as if they had always been 3, and one of them, if one listened, would creak in a way that meant it had been somewhere else and had come back. Claire came as she had said she would, at noon precisely, with the pallor of classrooms still on her, and a calm that looked practiced rather than natural. In the hall Anne lifted her eyes, and then lowered them as if politeness were a shallow dish she must carry without spilling. They went again to the corner room. The windows showed a light that had learned to behave, and the table kept its cloth straight. Maigret did not sit at once. He let the room recognize them. "I have little else," Claire said, opening her handbag and finding nothing in it except a handkerchief folded with too much care. "Only what you want to know about Wednesdays." He inclined his head. He had expected as much. The word had been walking with him all morning like a small dog that does not tire. "It was not a doctor," she said. "Not as the word is used by people who send bills. It was a man above the pharmacy, on the street behind the church, Madame Delpierre's, the one with the plaster Madonna in the window. They call him a counselor, but that is only a way of saying he listens. A retired clerk from the prefecture, I think. He keeps hours for people who are not ill enough for hospitals and not well enough to be alone. He sits with them. Sometimes he speaks. Mostly he doesn't. He charges nothing, which makes some people believe he cannot be good." "Name?" Maigret asked. "Rigal," she said. "Monsieur Rigal. He wears a vest in summer and keeps biscuits for those who need sugar. He never says you must, only perhaps." She gave the smallest apologetic smile. "I sent him 3 boys who were afraid of exams. He taught them how to breathe. 2 passed. And you sent Girard," Maigret said, without turning. "That into praise or accusation." "I told him," she said, and the memory made her voice drop, "that if one is always polite to one's own heart, it becomes vain." He laughed. He said he had made a god of small inconveniences, and that perhaps it was time he let them go. He went twice that I know of. He came back quiet, which is not the same as relieved. Yesterday? He asked. No, she said. Yesterday he wrote on Monday to say he might not go. He said he wanted to keep 3 o'clock for something that did not get written on paper. He wrote that like a boy making a plan for a holiday. Her mouth moved as if to say more and then didn't. I waited and did not go. I told you. He absorbed that and set it with the other pieces. The chair in the corridor at 7:30, the sun at 9:10, the hand, the glass, the tie. He asked for a description of Rigal, his hours, his room, his window. 2nd floor, she said, a geranium on the sill that looks as if it has survived many winters by not trusting anyone. He keeps his door open when he is there. You can see the corner of a green rug from the landing. And Morel, he said, because a house is an ecosystem and even the loud fish have to be counted. I have seen him, she admitted. He calls women madame as if the word were a coin he wishes to keep. He once held the door in a way that made it a favor. That is all. They stood. For a moment neither of them moved toward the door. Both looked at the 3rd chair, which did nothing and yet said a great deal. It is a foolish thing, she said, almost to herself, to be grateful to furniture. It is not foolish, he said. It is human. She left then, and the room took back its quiet as easily as a blanket takes a shape back. In the hall, Anne watched Claire go and then turned away smartly to polish a glass that had not asked for it. Maigret crossed the street and walked the back way toward the pharmacy. The Madonna in plaster had collected a thumbprint of soot on one cheek, which gave her a look of having cried once and been interrupted. The bell over the door sounded like something made in a shed. The woman behind the counter, Madame Delpierre, had the look of those who keep shop more out of stubbornness than profit. Monsieur Rigal? He asked, and she jerked her chin toward the stair as if sending him to fetch his own change. If he is there, she said, he is often there when people need him, and sometimes when they don't. She considered him, placing him in her habit of the world. For the commissaire, she added, he will be there. The stair smelled of old varnish and cough sweets. At the landing, the door was indeed open a hand's width. There was the green rug, and beyond it a square of room put together with patient thrift. A table with wrong legs that nonetheless stood, 2 chairs that had learned politeness from long use, a bookcase that had been a fruit crate, and, on the sill, the geranium, thin and brave. A man sat with his back to the window, grey hair, a vest despite the season, spectacles that were not fashionable in any. He lifted his head in the way people do who have been waiting without knowing they are waiting. Monsieur Rigal, Maigret said. Yes, the man said. And you are the policeman who walks as if he does not wish to frighten the floorboards. Girard, Maigret said, and the name between them sat with a docility that was not quite natural. I know, Rigal said. Madame Delpierre told me when she brought my bread. I had thought he might not come yesterday. He wrote on Monday. He always wrote instead of telephoning. Letters are less dangerous, he said. He wrote that he wanted to keep 3 o'clock. For a promise, I told him to keep it if it would do him more good than I. You saw him twice, Maigret said. 3 times. Rigal corrected gently. 2 Wednesdays and 1 Thursday when he had a fright on a tram and could not explain it. He was a conscientious man who thought conscientiousness would cure being alive. He used the word episodes, Maigret said. Did he mean pain? Fear, Rigal said simply. And the small embarrassments of the body that feel like accusations, sweat where there should not be sweat, breath that refuses to be taken along like a suitcase. He had a heart that wanted consideration, but it was not yet the sort of heart one names after doctors. I told him to walk slower and eat earlier, and to say good evening to someone when he had nothing to say. He said he would try, he did. He bought a woman a paper cone of chestnuts out of season, and it made him giddy. He told me about it as if he had robbed a bank. Did he speak of his son? Maigret asked. He spoke of the past in the voice. Of a boy and of the present in the voice of a clerk, Rigal said. The son lived in the past, so they were ill-matched. He loved him, and was ashamed of having failed in a way that looks like manners, not shouting when a child needed to hear a no. He wanted to be introduced to a woman, not so that she would approve, but so that she would exist for him even when he was not near her. That is an old man's desire in a middle-aged man. It is not criminal, it is dangerous to the heart. They sat a few minutes longer. Rigal, who listened for a living, listened to the policeman in silence, which is a subtle way of asking questions. Maigret stood finally, thanked him in the tone one reserves for those who have refused to sell one anything, and went down into the street, where the smell of boiled sugar from somewhere made the air tacky. Back at the quay, paper had gathered. In his tray, the way water gathers along a curb. He signed where signatures would be abused if not given. Lognon came in with rain on his hat brim and annoyance under his skin. "I have your Reims fellow traced all the way to Troyes and back," he said, dropping onto the chair that creaked under opinions. "He sells bicycle lamps to men who have never learned to ride in rain. He returns at 9 with the smugness of a man who believes trains exist for his convenience." "Good," Maigret said mildly. "Let him come home to his 3 chairs." "He will find them," Lognon said darkly, "and he will sit in all 3 if asked." "Let him try," Maigret murmured. He told Lognon, not as a report, but as a story, what Rigal had said. Lognon's face arranged itself into disdain, and then softened despite itself. "Listening," he said. "We should hire him for the bureau. He would fill fewer forms than I." They let the afternoon lower itself. At 4, Antoine came to sign with the subdued aggression of a man who has decided to get something distasteful done properly. He read the paper without really seeing it, wrote his name carefully, and accepted. The envelope from the wallet, the one that said where to find things, without opening it. "I will go back tonight," he said abruptly, then shook his head. "No, I will go in the morning." He liked mornings, they felt honest to him. He left as he had arrived, with squared steps, but at the door he hesitated and said without turning, "Thank you for not asking me to be kind. I don't yet know if I can be." "You will," Maigret said, which was both prediction and absolution. Evening set its table. The sky took on that color that belongs only to Paris when the light has given up arguing, not quite blue, not quite gray, something that remembers smoke. Maigret ate something simple in the café because habit is armor, and went across to the pension at 8:15. He told Madame Aubry he would sit for a while in the dining room, near the fern. She brought him coffee without being asked, and did not wipe the table twice as she sometimes did when nervous. People came and went the way they always do at that hour. The 2 commercial men returned and performed the small ballet of suitcases, at their feet, talking louder than their business required. A couple from Commercy took the table near the door and shared a plate of radishes with salt as if it were a strategy. The boy Gerard carried coal in smaller buckets now, as if even fuel grew tired toward night. Anne moved between tables with a steadiness that made her seem older. From the kitchen, the boiled fish announced itself, polite and immovable. At 5 to 9, the door opened and let in a smell of wet cloth and something perfumed that intended to distract. Morel stood in the threshold like a man arriving on a stage, whose audiences he had not yet met, but suspected would applaud. He was in his 40s, the easy kind that men keep when they have never done a thing in a hurry. His hair lay obediently, under too much oil. His suit was of a blue that did not occur in nature. He carried a case that seemed to weigh no more than his opinion of himself. He removed his hat with a flourish that ended a centimetre too late. "Madame Aubry," he said with grave gallantry, "you look as if the rain had been forced to apologize to you." He handed her a small paper bag that smelled absurdly of sweets, as if coming back to a house required tribute. He noticed Maigret when there was no longer any polite way not to, and performed the respectable man's smile for him, open in the middle, shut at the edges. "Commissaire," he said, making the word one shade too large, "you honor us." "I'm here for the coffee," Maigret said, and the refusal to take part in theatre made Morel's eyes flicker with the smallest irritation. He took his key from the drawer that squeaked and held it between finger and thumb, as if it were a mouthful of something he did not wish to swallow. "In my absence," he said, casual, "there have been tragedies. Poor Monsieur Girard. I did not know him well, a quiet man, too quiet perhaps. Quiet men make one nervous, one is afraid of what they keep." "Chairs make me nervous," Maigret said, watching nothing in particular. "They move when one is not looking." Morel's smile did not move. "Chairs?" he said. In the corridor at 7:30, Maigret went on conversationally. One stood where no chair stands for long. You know this house, it has habits. Ah, Morel said, as if indulging a child. The girl. She is given to little rearrangements. It makes her feel, what is the word? Important. Perhaps, Maigret said, or perhaps she had lent a chair and wished it to be missed. Morel's hand tightened a fraction on the key. My room is my room, he said. I am a man of order. If a chair moves, I notice. If it is moved back, I am grateful. We must all do our part to keep a house from becoming a café. He lifted the case a little. If you will excuse me, I am a figure of fatigue. Of course, Maigret said. Before you go, on Tuesdays, you are sometimes here at 3. Sometimes, Morel allowed, with the indulgence one gives to a policeman who has learned an uninteresting fact. My business has an elasticity that railroad men envy. You noticed then, Maigret said, as if remarking on weather, a woman who laughs in her throat. A scarf. Violet. Morel looked amused in a way that wished to be seen. Monsieur le Commissaire, he said lightly, I notice many things. I make a profession of noticing without telling. It is why respectable houses still take me as a guest. He bowed a fraction to Madame, whose mouth had gone tight at the edges, and went upstairs, his shoes not quite as quiet as he thought they were. Madame, Maigret said when the stair had finished speaking, if he asks for tea, give him tea. If he asks for a third chair, give him a third chair. I would like him to feel the house is itself. She gave him a look that had both humor and fatigue in it. The house is the house, she said. Men come and try to teach it tricks. It forgets them when they leave. He stayed a little longer, not because he expected drama, but because houses say their truest things just after a door has shut. At 9:20, the kettle began its breath again. At 9:25, a radio somewhere in the street found a dance, tune and then lost it. At 9:30, a step crossed the landing above, paused by the corner window and then moved away without committing to a direction. At 9:40, a scent that did not belong to boiled fish slipped down the stair and died in the cold air near the door. My niece will go up with towels, Madame said quietly, as if offering him the choice to stay or not to. He shook his head. No, let the towels be wanted first. He put on his hat and went out into a night that had decided, after all, to rain. Fine drops, almost invisible, that nonetheless wet one's face as if one had put it under a tap. He walked to the corner and stood under the awning of the tabac, where the boy with the hollow cheeks counted cigarettes by tens without using his lips. From across, the 2 windows of the corner room showed mild rectangles of light. One shadow moved and then another. He did not try to name them. He did not want a scene. He wanted the house to breathe its own air. Behind him, a tram rattled past with the weary competence of old machines. He thought of a geranium on a sill that had learned the art of not dying by remembering to do without. He thought of a young man who had put a chair between himself and his father and had decided for the moment that he had been right. He thought of a woman who taught arithmetic to children who did not know what courage looked like written down. When he crossed back, the bell jangled the same as always, and the net curtain in the kitchen moved with steam. Anne glanced at him with a question she did not know how to frame. He shook his head once, and she did not ask. Tomorrow, he said to Madame, we will talk again. If you are asked, say yes to small things and no to large ones. That will be enough. On the boulevard, the rain had become steadier, the kind that remakes the shine on the pavement every minute. He turned his collar up and began to walk toward home, where he would sit with his wife and say little and let the day put its head down. He felt that the story had become itself, not a crime that needed catching, but a human tangle that would loosen if one did not pull at it. There would be no grand reveal. There would be a pair of hands, one older, one younger, and a chair, and a woman with a violet scarf who would keep it on a peg again without meaning harm. Somewhere above a pharmacy, a man would wash a cup and leave his door open. Somewhere in the corner room, a scent would decide to go away. And in the morning, over coffee that steamed as if it had opinions, they would finish saying the small truths. People always leave to the second day. Morning made the city look as if it had been wiped with a clean cloth and left to dry on the sill. Madame Maigret was already at the stove when he came into the kitchen, The coffee smelled decisive. She set a cup in front of him and tilted her head at the way he rotated it a quarter turn before lifting it. "You count with your hands when—" "You are thinking," she said, "as if the cup had numbers on it." "It does," he said, 3 and 9 and a little after 10. He did not have to explain. She let the remark sit. On the way to the pension, he walked the long block that skirted the station yard. The smell of metal and early coal stayed low to the ground. At the tabac, the boy who counted cigarettes without moving his lips was rolling a new stack of papers into the stand. He gave Maigret a nod that belonged to men who open shutters before the street opens its eyes. The rain had stopped in the night and left the pavements with the sheen of a boiled sweet. The house looked smaller by day, as houses do when their lamps have been put away. The bell jangled with less importance. In the hall a trestle had been set, a sheet lay ready. The doctor had sent his final note: no poison, no lesion. The time narrowed with the ruthless calm of science to between 9:30 and 10. He was already walking toward it, the handwriting seemed to say without sentiment. Madame Aubry met him with her apron tied tighter than usual, as if a knot could hold a morning together. Her mouth had the particular line of women who have lain. Awake, replaying steps on stairs. "The van will come," she said quietly, "before noon. I told him—" she did not say his name. "I told him last night when I was alone in the room that the sheets would not be angry. It is foolish," she added, almost annoyed at herself. "But people leave a sulk behind them. It is better to speak to it." "It is not foolish," he said. Anne came from the kitchen with a coffee pot and stopped when she saw him, not out of surprise but to gather herself. The air around her had changed in a way that is not visible. Women who have decided to say, "A thing carry it in their shoulders." "In the room," she said, looking not at him but past him. She swallowed. "When I found him with Madame and sent Gérard for the police, I did a thing I did not say yesterday. I put his hand. I put it on his chest. It looked—" She searched for a word that would not betray anyone. "It looked untidy. I closed his eyes. I smoothed the tie. I am not supposed to. But a man is not furniture." Maigret nodded, and in his nod was a small relief that would not be written in any report. "Thank you," he said simply. "It explains a question that had been annoying. A doctor. He will be grateful to hear it, though he will call it an interference." She accepted the rebuke for a profession that was not hers with a sort of sad humor. "He may call it what he likes," she said. It looked better. They went up together. In number 5 the bed had been remade with a kind of respect. The coverlet lay flat, the pillow straight. The table, with its 2 rightful chairs, stood quiet. The third had gone home to 7. On the washstand the carafe was full again, not out of carelessness but from reflex. People refill things when there is nothing else to do. He stood a moment and then bent to the suitcase once more, though he did not expect it to have learned new tricks overnight. The same shirts, the same tins, the same corner with the book of small thrift. On the chair, folded and waiting, a hat. He picked it up, feeling the small depression the index finger had made over months at the front, where a man pinches it as he puts it on. He set it down. "We will send it with him," he said to Madame, who nodded. At 9:30 the van came quietly, as if it belonged to the house. 2 men who had seen many stairs stood in the hall and took off their caps and did not say a word more than they needed to. Anne stood with her hands pressed flat into her apron so that she would not lift them to her face. Madame crossed herself quickly, a gesture she performed with an air of private practicality rather than display. The movement down the stairs was not solemn so much as competent. On the landing, the window caught the grey and kept it. For a second, the sheet took on the colour of weather and then gave it back. One hears the small sounds at such times, the scrape of a boot, a hinge that needed oil, a whisper someone doesn't own. Then the door and the bell and the soft reabsorbing of a house that must return to its ordinary. In the dining room, coffee was set at the end of the table. He did not sit. Antoine arrived a few minutes later, cap in hand, his expression already braced against unfamiliar sympathies. He signed where he had to and whispered "Merci" to Madame, with a stiffness that was less ingratitude than self-protection. He would return tomorrow for what was his. "I will come early," he said, and to his own surprise he added, Before anyone is awake, it is easier. We are always awake, Madame said. Her voice made it an observation, not a reproach. Claire entered behind him, not by arrangement, simply because the morning had put her on a track that ended at the house. She had a book under her arm, something with a cloth spine that made her look more like herself than the coat did. Antoine half turned and paused. This was the shape of a moment in which people often say too much. Neither of them spoke. She stood, one step inside the door, and held the book closer to her ribs. He looked at her and then at the palm of his hand, as if the words he needed had been written there and washed off. Finally he said, not to her but to the space between them, he wanted to buy chestnuts when there are none. It came out as a complaint, and then, betraying him, softened into something like permission. She nodded without moving otherwise. He did, she said. He laughed about it as if he had cheated winter. She took a breath that made no sound. If you need... She stopped, not because she had lost the word, but because offering help to a stranger is like putting a warm object into cold water. It cracks if one doesn't lower it carefully. I teach near the canal, she said instead. I am there each day at 2:30. It is a number anyone can remember. He inclined his head. It was not acceptance, not refusal. It was a mark on a page that could be added to later. Morel came down at that moment, with his hat at an angle that had been decided in a mirror. He paused on the second stair from the bottom, in the way practiced men pause to allow their presence, to be noticed without the vulgarity of an announcement. His eye took in Antoine and Claire, and weighed them not as people, but as incidentals in a story in which he wished to be central. A sorrowful day, he said, removing his hat with the same flourish as last night. We must be gentle with one another. Be gentle with the chairs, Maigret said mildly. Morel's eyes shifted not to the furniture but to the person who had mentioned it. Always, he said, and smiled in a way meant to be understood by women and policemen alike as charm. He picked up a slice of bread from the tray as if accepting a sacrament, and bit it with neatness. On the landing at 9:30, Maigret went on, as if commenting on the weather again. Someone paused. The floor bears marks for those who know where to look. I do not ask where you paused. Only do not insult the house by claiming you floated. Morel's gaze went over the room and came back with a new caution in it. If one lives here, he said, one learns to walk softly. There was a noise above. A body being moved, Maigret said, saving him the effort of lying politely. You smelled it, and it spoiled your appetite. I understand. Morel inclined his head, chastened, in the economical way of men who never quite believe they have done wrong if they haven't been caught at it. If I can be of assistance, he said. You can, Maigret answered, by giving your key to the boy when you leave today. He will oil the lock, it complains. Morel looked as if he had been invited to contribute to a civic fund, and wasn't. Sure of the sum. He gave a small bow and went out at an angle that said he had been dismissed more elegantly than he enjoyed. Gérard appeared with a small box under his arm, the sort used for hats or pastries when the day is a celebration. In it, neatly arranged, lay the few things that could go with the deceased without making trouble: the photo of the sailor-suited boy, the tin of buttons, the razor wrapped in paper, the book with the careful entries, the cinema stubs bound with string. Antoine looked at the box with the suspicion men reserve for objects that want to start stories. Keep the razor, he said to Madame after a moment. For the next man who comes without one, he would like that. He took the rest. He also left this, Anne said, coming forward with the letter that had been poor Anne. She did not offer it to Antoine. She held it as if it were a medal someone else had earned. It is not for anyone to read except the person it names, she said to Maigret in a tone meant for him in the house. But I will tell you that it is kind. If anyone in the street says something ugly, I will not mind. The flush in her cheeks made her look younger and more decided. You will not have to mind, he said. Most street ugliness blows away after 2 doors if a woman does not chase it with a broom. The morning settled. People came for bread, for coffee, for the reassurance that some houses stay open. The talk in the dining room resumed the ordinary pitches of weather and schedules. Conversations skated around the topic the way one skirts. A puddle without stepping in, but nonetheless sees one's face in it for a second. At 11 the telephone rang. It was the colonel again, courtesy made slightly stiff by the effort of repeating it. "You have my man back by Friday?" he asked, and then, before Maigret could answer, added, "It is better he returns sooner. Idleness is poor medicine." Maigret said they would do what papers required. He did not promise anything to the wrong person. At past, he walked again to the street behind the church. The pharmacy bell made its small barnyard sound. Madame Delpierre did not look up. From her ledger, "He is there," she said, meaning Rigal, and then, by way of elaboration, "He has been sitting with his door open since 8. Men who listen expect someone to come even when the street is empty." He went up. The door was open the same, hand's width. The geranium on the sill seemed to have survived another night. Rigal was at the table with a biscuit on a saucer he had not eaten. "You have told him?" he asked, not naming the he. "Yes," Maigret said. "He came. He spoke." With his hands on the table, empty. "He will be all right, but not at once." "They are never all right at once," Rigal said. "We make our mistakes over years. We should not expect to correct them in an hour." They spoke of small practicalities. A certificate here, a stamp. There? The fact that habits like chestnuts out of season are not cured by signatures. On the way down, Maigret paused on the landing and looked at the corner of the green rug and thought of the other room with the window and its corners where shoulders leaned. Windows and chairs, furniture and yet more. When he returned to the pension, the dining room had been reclaimed by the noon trade. Steam from the kitchen made the glass bloom. Claire had gone. Antoine had gone. Morel had left his key on the desk with a small flourish and a note that complained about the softness of pillows written as praise. Madame read it and put it under the till without letting the drawer squeak. "Commissaire," she said, "you will eat." It was not a question. He sat where he had sat the night before near the fern. Anne brought him a plate, and with it a remark that she tried to make casual and failed. "When I iron linens," she said, eyes on the cloth before her, "I count 1, 2, 3. 2, not to see if they are there, to calm the iron. Today I ironed nothing and still I counted." She looked at him then, courage in the glance. "It does not feel like a crime. It feels like we did not hurry enough." "It was no one's crime," he said. "And perhaps we hurried the right amount. He had time to put his key on the table. Some men do not have even that." She nodded and put the cup down with the carefulness of someone setting a small stone on a grave. Outside, the light had taken on that indecisive tone again that belonged to afternoons that cannot decide whether to commit to a weather. He knew. There was still the evening to come and Morel to attend to in a way that would not taste of theatre, and perhaps one last talk in the corner room, not with 3, but with 2. He felt the quiet satisfaction of a picture that has not yet been framed but has stopped moving in the mind. When he lit his pipe, the smoke rose with the steadiness of a thought that has found where to sit. In the doorway, a man poked his head, a porter from the station, cap pushed back, eyes holding the apology of a messenger. "Pardon," he said, looking at Maigret. "There is a woman at the kiosk who asks for the policeman who walks, as if he does not like to startle floors. She says she has remembered something about a laugh." He lifted one shoulder in a shrug that had learned to carry errand and indifference together. "She says it is nothing. She says it keeps her from stirring her pot." "Tell her to stir slowly and to keep it simmering," Maigret said, standing. "I will come before it boils." He put on his hat, which had kept its shape through many weathers, and glanced once at the stairs. The house for now had said what it meant. Outside, the boulevard looked ready for a little rain again. He would let it come. Some truths prefer to arrive under umbrellas. The kiosk near the canal had a roof that remembered the war, and a counter that remembered everyone who had leaned there to keep from deciding things too quickly. The woman behind it had flour on her sleeve and a way of keeping her pot at the exact tremble between simmer and boil without looking. She watched him approach and lifted her chin in a way that said she had hoped he would be the one to come and had prepared not to be disappointed. "You stir slowly," he said by way of greeting. "If you stir fast, things stick for spite," she returned, then glanced over his shoulder toward the boulevard as if the story itself might come into view behind him. "It is nothing," she warned, "the way people warn when they have something that they cannot guarantee will shine under inspection. A laugh? It is only a laugh." Those are often the best somethings, he said. She set her ladle down as if she were setting down a baby. At 4:20, she began, when the telephone ate a coin and complained, I had just put the onions in. A lady called your house, the house with the good soup and the corridor that smells of oil sometimes. She asked for a man, and she asked in a voice that had been taught to speak without taking up space. When the girl said he could not come, the lady made a laugh in her throat, the kind one makes so as not to spill crying on the word. A teacher's laugh, she added, as if identifying a bird. And at 6, a man came who smelled of machine, oil and impatience. He fed the telephone coins as if paying a debt. He asked for the same man and did not say please. When told no, he laughed once, without humor, the way boys do when they have decided not to show they are put out. Then he said courage, not to the girl but to the air, and went away with his shoulders looking for a fight. She looked at him with a defiant modesty. It is small, she said, but last night when I tried to sleep and the stew told me the onions had been put in at 4:20, I thought, that is the sound I heard. It is enough, he said, and meant it. She had given him nothing new and everything he needed. 2 sounds tied to 2 times, a confirmation of the arithmetic his day had been doing. She considered him for a moment, her face softening into curiosity. And at 9:45, she added, surprising herself with another piece that had not asked to be remembered until now. I was wiping the counter, and the rain had begun in single drops, heavy as words. From the corner room of the house, a chair spoke just a little against the floor. Not a scrape, a shift, then quiet. Then, not long after, footsteps down the stair, steady, not a woman's steps. I would not have noted it, but the chair has a way of speaking that is like a person clearing his throat. She smiled, apologizing to herself. I am foolish today. I hear furniture. We all do, Maigret said. We usually pretend not to. He thanked her and bought a small cone of nothing, roasted nothing out of season, to carry back to the house where the smell of fish and soap argued with coffee as always. He did not eat it. He held it and the paper warmed his fingers. When he crossed the boulevard, the pension had resumed its posture of competence. The men from the van had gone. The sheet's brief passage down the stair had become a story, the E. Hall would keep in its wood and tell no one. Morel's key lay on the desk. The boy Gerard had oiled its groan, and now when Anne pulled the drawer, it opened without complaining. She did it twice, for the pleasure of giving a small thing ease. The hue, "Doctor is content?" Madame asked quietly, as if contentment was something a man with a bag could leave behind with a certificate. "He is," Maigret said. "He will write heart in a hand that looks official and displeased." And then, because he had learned to allow the house its little reconciliations, he added, "And he thanks you, mademoiselle, for arranging the man to look as men should when others come." Anne flushed and did not lift her eyes. "It was not for him," she said, and then corrected herself with the blunt grace of the honest. "It was for all of us." He sat near the fern again and watched the room learn its spaces without him. People came for the noon plates and left, their shoulders lower, not because the food was miraculous, but because it had never pretended to be. The porter who had brought the message earlier came in for a bowl and ate standing at the corner of the counter, rapid and careful, as if respecting somebody else's chair. Across the way, the tobacco boy arranged papers into a square that made order out of headlines. The city felt as if it had been wound that morning and would run till evening without fuss. At 2:30, he walked the short block to the school. He did not go in. He stood by the railings and listened to the sound of chalk on board, far back in his own memory like a train thought too late. Children spilled out at the half-hour, each trailing his own weather. Claire came last, as teachers, due after small disputes had been adjudged and a lunch pail found. She saw him and altered her pace without making a show of it. "It is arithmetic?" she asked, so he wouldn't have to decide on a place in the street to put his purpose. "Only a sum," he said. The laugh at 4:20, the woman at the kiosk heard it. It was yours. At 6, the word courage, the same kiosk, was your pupil's, your man's son. She absorbed this with the calm of someone who has made a column of figures and found the total unsurprising. "I thought so," she said. "It is one thing to teach boys to show their work. It is another to see a man do it." And at 9:45 he added, because he had decided to say things as they seemed, and not to protect people from the furniture of their lives, a chair moved upstairs. Perhaps only someone stood. Perhaps the sun went out. The house remembers that he did not run. She closed her eyes briefly and opened them again. "That is something," she said. "Running makes a different noise." She did not ask for Morel's name. She knew it and did not need it, the way people do not need to name street corners they pass every day. "Will you speak to him?" "Tonight," he said, "not to find blame, to invite him to take his chair and not leave it wandering." "He will not like that," she said, with a small, tired amusement that honored his profession by telling him nothing untrue. "Few men do," he said. And then, because he had seen men younger than Antoine learn to hold a sentence the same way they had learned to hold a rifle, he added, "The boy will not come this evening. He will come in the morning, when he does not have to fight the soup and the smell of wet wool. If you come at the same hour, you may pass him at the door by accident. Or not." She looked at him, and in her face was that gratitude people dislike feeling toward policemen. He ignored it for her. "We will see what the weather says," she answered, and they both knew the weather had very little to do with it. He left her and walked back by the long way so that the day would not hurry. In the window of a radio shop, a salesman demonstrated the tuning of a set to a man who had decided not to buy. The voice in the box, tinny, far insistent, spoke of nothing that would matter to this street. Above the pharmacy, the geranium in Regal's window persisted, red in a way that had stopped apologizing for growing in a city. Regal himself stood with his vest buttoned, licking a thumb to turn a page, and then not reading it. They nodded as men do who acknowledge one another's usefulness without the burden of friendship. By 6 the day deepened. The pension lit its lamps. Madame Aubry had put a sprig of parsley in a jar without committing to calling it decoration. Such gestures reassure the house more than the guests. Maigret ate a plate of something that announced itself as beef and potatoes, and was precisely so. He thought of the first night and his wife's apples, and the way a telephone makes a different sound when news is at the other end of it. At 8:45, Morel came down and up again, with the serene self-ownership of a man who believes he has paid to quarter his ego in other people's dwellings. He wore a grey tie this time that perhaps intended understatement. He had a scent he believed to be subtle. He nodded to Maigret in the manner of someone flattering a painting by recognizing its good work. At 9, Maigret rose without hurry and followed the stairs at a pace that did not teach them anything new. He tapped at the door of 7 and let the tap be the only announcement. Morel opened, hatless, in shirt sleeves too white for the work of men who labor, and stood aside the exact amount necessary. The corner room had its 2 windows open a finger, enough to let the rain smell argue with the perfume. 3 chairs, the right 3, stood where they always had. "Please," Morel said, "if you are here in the capacity of fate, I prefer to drink to you." "I seldom drink after 8, Maigret said, "and never with fate." He took the chair near the window, and the chair answered by settling. Morel chose the one that placed him between, as if to guard both his flanks. He gestured vaguely toward the case, as if the objects inside it would stand up for him if asked. "Your room is popular in the afternoons," Maigret said, not as a warning but as a weather remark. The phrase, "with the window," circulates. "Window is a window," Morel said. "People who have little learn to exalt details. It gives them the illusion of choice." "Yesterday," Maigret continued, as if discussing football fixtures, "you arrived at 9 and paused at 9:30 on the landing because the house changed its breathing. Downstairs, someone recorded the pause. Upstairs, a chair moved in 5. A man's feet went down. Later, a woman came this morning with a book under her arm, and a boy with oil on his hands signed his name. You know all this, because houses tell the same stories to those who live in them." Morel ran a hand along his sleeve, as if inviting the cloth to admire his patience. "And what is the story you have brought me as a bedtime treat, commissaire? That I am a man with a taste for companionship? That I keep 3 chairs in case the first 2 are insufficient? I confess. The crime stands. No," Maigret said softly, "that you are a man who prefers to borrow the furniture of a house and not its responsibilities. It is not a crime either. But last week, Tuesday, When you were here at 3, you lent your phrase to someone. The room with the window. He wrote it down in a note we found. He used the phrase because it felt like permission. Morel's face shifted in that small way faces do when the person inside has decided to stop posturing. It made him plainer and more bearable. He asked me, he said surprisingly without disdain, if the room would be free. He couldn't bring himself to ask the girl. He thought I had authority because I dress as if I do. I told him the room is a freedom as big as anyone's pocket. He wrote his plan like a schoolboy. He was pleased with himself for wanting something. He did not steal anything, Maigret said. Hear that plainly. He died of the thing he had been keeping in and of the timing of certain words. There is nothing for me here but to see people through their own furniture. But if you wish to be useful, say now that you saw the boy last night, and that his head was high and his hands empty. Morel looked at him and considered whether generosity might make him handsomer. He decided it would. At 9:50, he said, a young man in a jacket that had been brushed too much passed the door smelling of oil and anger. He did not run. He closed the door carefully, as if it were ill and not to be jarred. He went out, and later, he made a little movement of his hand that meant fate, that meant heart, that meant the thing that had already been written by a doctor. Later, the house had one less man who left his newspaper folded exactly 3 fingers in from the edge. Thank you, Maigret said. He stood, and the chair rubbed the floor in a way that in this room meant nothing more than wood and use. You will keep your 3 chairs, he added, but when you borrow phrases in houses like this, remember that they have owners. They come back quicker than you think. In the corridor, the carpet gave underfoot with the humility of an old servant. He went down into the hall where the net curtain trembled, because the kettle had come again to its opinions. Anne lifted her head from the ledger. Madame wiped her hands and left them clean and damp. He did not announce anything. He did not need to. The house, having been listened to, had finished speaking for the day. Back at home, Madame Maigret had kept supper warm without letting it complain. He ate and did not say much. After, he sat in the chair near the window and lit his pipe. The rain began on the boulevard Richard Lenoir, as if it had kept its appointment, and was pleased not to be late. He thought of the boy who would come in, the morning and the woman with the book, and of the man who wore a vest in summer and kept biscuits for the breathless, and of a shopkeeper who stirred slowly, because fast stirring makes things stick. He thought of a chair that had been moved and then returned, and of a hand placed with respect where a doctor had not wanted it, and of a laugh that had to be kept in the throat to keep from spilling. He let the smoke rise. It made a column. That did not waver. Tomorrow would be quieter. The paper would write a line that satisfied no one and hurt no one. He was content to let them. The truth, here, was not for papers. It was for a small room with a window and 3 chairs, and for the people who would sit in them with their hands open on the table, learning the arithmetic of proximity. Morning came on time, as if to reassure the city that punctuality still existed for those who needed it. The drip under the awning across from the pension had stopped. A sparrow took ownership of the gutter with noisy industry. Maigret walked with his collar down for once. He had slept, which surprised him, and woke with a small idea that felt like a finished knot rather than a new thread. The house would be ready to do what houses do after death, make space for the living without boasting of it. Inside, the hall had the peace of rooms that have been put back together. Anne had set a fresh pot on the stove and let the lid tremble in its own rhythm. The drawer under the till opened with its new silence. On the peg by the door, the violet scarf hung rinsed of its perfume, as if it too had decided to behave. He sat near the fern because the fern seemed to expect it. He drank the coffee Madame poured and said nothing. She looked at him the way good hostesses do when they have chosen their silence as carefully as their words. At 8:15, the bell sounded with no drama, and a young man came in with his cap in his hand and his jaw set in that way boys try to make into adulthood. Antoine had the box under his arm, as if it weighed exactly what he would admit it did. He put it on the counter, nodded to Madame in a way that promised he would try to be less stiff tomorrow, and came to Maigret's table. "Before there are other people," he said. "Yes," Maigret agreed. He took from his pocket the envelope. Maigret had given him the day before, the one from the wallet that had contained instructions and not advice. He had opened it in the night, and he had brought it back as if it were a witness. "It is only addresses and the book at the post office," he said, making the words seem smaller than the effort the writer had needed. "And one line about not quarreling with myself." He wrote that as if he had practice. The skin beside his mouth moved. "I laughed without humor," he added, with an honesty that looked like pride trying to repent. "That is my specialty." "You will go." "To the post office," Maigret said. "I will," Antoine said. "And after—" He looked past Maigret toward the corridor as if distances could be measured in sentences. "After, I will go where one goes when there is nothing to do except not stand in a hall." He lifted his hands and let them fall, as if releasing a tool. "I have my train at noon tomorrow." "If you have an hour now," Maigret said, as if discussing a timetable, "there is a room with a window that is free. It keeps its chair count correctly again. I would like to see it continue." Antoine's eyes flicked and held. "She comes." "At past," he said, as if repeating something that had been negotiated without words. "I thought, if it is all the same, I would sit somewhere where a person does not have to pass with soup. The smell makes me—" He stopped because men don't say such things easily. "Perhaps the room," he finished. They went up together. Number 7 was as the house wished it. 2 windows opened a finger, 3 chairs as they should be, the bed made as if a man had slept well for once. Maigret sat a moment and then stood again, because he was not part of what had to happen. "The house knows how to be quiet," he said. "When you want coffee, the kettle will already have begun to think about it." He left the door open, a hand's width, and went down to the dining room where Madame had set 2 cups on a tray without claiming credit for foresight. Claire arrived at the half-hour with the book under her arm again. It looked less like a shield today, and more like an object one carries because hands are happier occupied. She did not pause in the hall. She did not look for permission. She took the stair as if the risers were numbers she knew. Maigret watched her back disappear into the corner and then turned his head away as one does at a window when a lamp is lit in a room across the street. He did not listen. He listened. There was the sound chairs make when they are moved a little and then put back. No scrape, only a polite adjustment. The floor above him took a new weight and approved. No voices came down, only the sort of quiet that means people are speaking in their own language and do not need interpreters. After a few minutes, the kettle in the kitchen decided to boil. He let it. He waited. Longnon came in at 9 with a folder that had been sat on by trains. He put it on the table, pushed his hat back, and gave the room a look that allowed for no romance. "Heart," he said, flicking the top paper with one finger. In longhand, in duplicate, with a stamp that cost more than the time. "Your colonel telephoned to be reassured that the boy will not desert, because his father did what fathers do, die when it is inconvenient." I reassured him. He thanked me with a grunt that I am sure was intended as poetry. "We owe him a biscuit," Maigret said. "We owe no one anything," Longnon retorted. But he sat anyway because the coffee smelled better here than it did where the forms lived. He glanced toward the stair. "Your arithmetic teacher?" "In the room with the window," Maigret said. "Chairs?" "They will manage," Maigret said, and did not add the rest because it did not belong to the police. They drank. The house adjusted itself around the hour. The boy Gérard went past with sheets folded into the square only strong arms make. He had oiled the lock and had a trace of it on his thumb he would discover at lunch. Anne moved in the corridor with a tray, kept her eyes low, lifted them once, lowered them again and smiled at no one. Madame counted spoons and then stopped counting, because some mornings you trust the drawer. At 10 the steps came down in the measured way of feet that have learned not to run. Claire entered the dining room first, not because she led, but because she had a better instinct for reducing the distance between a private thing and the public. She set the book on the counter and said to Madame, "Please," which covered coffee, kindness, and several smaller requests she would never formulate. Antoine followed and did not look at anyone at first. He stood near the fern as if it were a respectable witness, and when he did lift his head, his eyes found Maigret's and did not ask for rescue. "We have said ordinary things," he said. The words sounded exhausted, which is appropriate for the truth. "That is enough." Claire, whose calm had a nick in it that made it human, said, "He asked me if I knew where the chestnut cart had gone. I said it will come back when the season begins, and he said he would wait. We shook hands," she added, as if informing the house of a fact that needed to be recorded in the ledger. "We did not use the third chair." Antoine's mouth tried to be wry and almost succeeded. "We put it against the wall," he said. "He always liked walls," he added, and the remark made him blink but did not undo him. "Tomorrow I will go to the post office. After that," he lifted his shoulders, "after that is after that. You will come here once more," Maigret said, "because the house is owed a goodbye. It will not keep your scent. It is not sentimental. But courtesies matter to houses as they do to people." Antoine nodded. He looked at Claire then and shifted his weight in the small awkward dance that precedes a truce. 2:30, he said, repeating her number, anchoring it. "I am not good at sums. I will be on time. I will leave a problem on the board," she said. "Someone should solve it." He took the box from the counter and held it properly with both hands. He thanked Madame, not for coffee but for having been a person in the days when being a person is work. He thanked Anne with his eyes, and she, who had put a hand where a doctor had not wanted one, did not fold under the gratitude. He went out. His shoulders were still squared, but they no longer pretended to carry more than they could. Claire stayed a minute longer, as women do when they are considering whether to make life easier for someone by making it harder for themselves. "The man upstairs," she said, meaning Morel without naming him, "is very proud of having chairs." "He may keep them," Maigret said. "A man should be allowed to be proud of furniture if nothing more dangerous is at hand." She smiled faintly. "You are kind," she said. "No," he answered, "only thorough." She left then, and the scarf brushed the peg as it went out, leaving nothing behind. By 11 the house had returned to its tasks. The radio in the corner found a march and then decided it wanted a waltz. The smell of onions reasserted itself with authority. The postman came with a bundle that was mostly disappointment, and 2 envelopes that made people straighten up. Gerard argued with a sack of potatoes and won by the usual margin. Morel left a complaint in the drawer written like a compliment. Madame put it away where paper goes to be forgotten. At the quay the doctor's form waited with its blank little victory. Cause, time, the absolution of Latin words for common failures. Maigret signed it with a pen that had lost its temper years ago. A clerk asked if this would be entered under natural, and received the look that makes clerks remember they are people. Janvier came in with a smear of rain on his sleeve, and a grin that belonged to a man who has found nothing where he half hoped for something to enliven the day. "Rigal sends his greetings," he said. "He says he will leave his door open on Wednesdays. He says if the boy comes he will offer him a biscuit and not advice." "That is a good rule," Maigret said. There was nothing left to do that looked like work, and yet everything important had been done. He walked back to the pension one last time in the afternoon and stood at the corner as the school let out. Claire passed with 2 boys arguing about a compass, and she corrected them without stopping, a hand gesture that left them both suddenly on the same side. Antoine was not there. He would come later or not. The house would survive either choice. He went in for a beer he did not finish. The tray of radishes had made an appearance, as it always did on days when Madame felt strict. The salt cellar wore its damp. Anne counted glasses and then deliberately lost count, because it pleased her to begin again. The violet scarf hung on its peg and had become simply a scarf that would keep a throat from catching cold. Upstairs, in the corner room, 3 chairs stood with the confidence of objects that had outlasted many conversations. In number 5 the bed kept its shape, and the hat waited in the box until someone decided whether a man should be buried as he had lived, with something to put on when going out. In the late afternoon he took the long way home. The sky had chosen grey and committed to it. On the street with the pharmacy, the plaster Madonna's soot tear had been wiped by someone who believed in such economies. Wriggle stood in his doorway with his vest and his biscuits, and nodded without insisting on being wise. Near the canal the kiosk woman stirred her pot with moral patience, and said to him as he passed, "I remembered another thing and then forgot it. That is sometimes best." He tipped his hat to the philosophy. At Boulevard Richard Lenoir, Madame was trimming beans, her knife making that sound like rain on a small roof. He told her only that there would be no report to read in the paper that would satisfy people looking for monsters. She said she would keep the pears back for tomorrow, and he said that would be fine. After supper, he sat in his chair by the window and lit his pipe. The smoke rose politely. The rain did not come and did not need to. He thought about the small arithmetic people do when they are late to learn proximity. How a chair can be a shield one day and a courtesy the next. How a hand on a breastbone can mean fear or simply the wish to keep something in. How men who ask for courage may be asking for permission. He thought of a man who bought chestnuts in the wrong season and was pleased with himself for wanting to. He let the thoughts stand where they wanted in the room. There are cases, he knew, that end without an arrest, but with a rearrangement of furniture that leaves people a little less alone. This had been one of them. The day after, the city did not change its mind about the weather. It held to a soft, undecided grey that spared people the trouble of sunglasses or umbrellas. Maigret arrived later than habit, after a visit to the post office where a clerk with a moustache like a ruler measured out sympathy by the centimetre along with the forms. The pension had the patient sound of a house that has learned how to live with a new quiet. In the hall, the peg with the scarf was empty. Someone had finally remembered it for what it was. He found Madame Aubrey in the dining room with a ledger open and a pencil resting on the seam like a bridge between two columns. She glanced up and made that small motion with her mouth that respectable. Women used to say both good morning and we are still here. Anne was polishing the glass on the café clock with care and without hope of changing its mind about the hour. Gérard carried a crate of apples that knocked softly together as he turned the corner, each dull thud like an agreeable answer. "Are your gentlemen from Champagne?" Maigret asked, meaning Morel. "He left before breakfast," Madame said, not displeased. "He took his scent with him but left the smell." She turned a page. "He will return on Tuesday. The pillows will survive." At 10:30, the door opened to a draught that brought in a smell of the canal and the kind of cold that asks for coffee. Antoine came with his cap in his hand, the box under his arm again, this time lighter. He set it on the counter, lifted the lid and took out the bundle of letters bound with string. The small parcel Claire had returned to him yesterday with the precise humility of someone who knows when an object has chosen its owner. "For Melun," he said to Madame, more a request than an instruction. "If you will let me address it here, he will be buried there. The cousin knows the priest. The letters—" He looked at them without touching. "I will not read them now. It would be the wrong kind of courage." Madame pushed the ink and a pen toward him and did not watch. Anne folded brown paper with the efficiency of shops. He wrote the address carefully, each letter a small truce with his own impatience. When he was done, he tied the string again, and handed the parcel to Maigret without ceremony, as if a policeman were a sensible conduit on such mornings. "At the post," Maigret said. "Registered, registered," Antoine repeated. The word cheered him the way bureaucracy sometimes does when it proposes to hold grief in a pocket with a receipt. He hesitated, then reached again into the box and produced a hat, the blue, Serge Mans, which yesterday had waited on the chair like a word no one wanted to say. He placed it back gently. He should have it, he said, and then, because he had not meant to say anything more than that, he moved away, his ears hot with having revealed a sentiment without warning. At noon, Claire appeared at the door with her book under her arm, and the room, which had learned not to expect drama, made space for something that wasn't. She nodded to Madame with a respect that looked older than she was, and looked at Antoine without trying to detain his eyes. He met her at the end of the counter, where Madame kept the parsley sprig in its jar, as if vegetables could keep a house moral. "The letters go to Melun," he said. "It is correct." "It is," she agreed. "I have kept nothing." She heard how stark that sounded and added, with the kind of humor people allow themselves when sentences would otherwise become too large, "Except a page of sums I do not need." He understood. "One keeps what one can do again," he said, and for a second his mouth remembered how to be young. "Today I will go to that man above the pharmacy and not let him give me advice. I will take his biscuit. He will be grateful," she said gravely. "He tells me he prefers gratitude to wisdom. It is kinder to the stomach." They stood a moment in the unremarkable way of people who have come to the end of necessary words. He lifted the box again, lighter still, and looked toward the corridor. "I already said goodbye," he told Maigret without being asked. "To the room, to the other room as well." He meant 7. I counted the chairs without touching. "Them 3. It is an honest number." "It is," Maigret said. "It adds without borrowing." Antoine nodded and left with a step that had ceased to insist on its squareness. The door sighed and shut. In the half-second after, the house took a new breath and did not make a show of it. In the afternoon, papers were signed at the quay without. The resistance they sometimes offer, as if the ink itself felt the case did not belong to the theatre of crime. The doctor's neat Latin closed its fist around the phrase heart failure and then relaxed. Anne's confession about the hand on the chest had found its way to him. He had shrugged with an irritation that was only professional, and then, when no one was looking, said it had been decently done. Janvier brought the receipt from the post office and the clerk's compliment on the address, as if penmanship were a form of virtue. Lognon delivered, with gloomy satisfaction, the news that Reims had nothing more to add about a man who sold lamps and opinions. In late light, because stories like this prefer their endings to sit modestly on the rim of evening, Maigret walked without hurry past the pharmacy. Rigal's door was open its usual finger's breadth. Inside, Antoine occupied the edge of a chair like an apprentice learning to trust a tool. Rigal, in his vest, pushed the saucer closer with 2 fingers and did not open his mouth except to bite a biscuit. They both looked content to keep the air as it was. Across at the kiosk, the woman stirred and called without looking up. The onions did not stick, which was a verdict she seemed to offer on the day as much as the pot. He raised his hand in thanks and kept walking. Evening brought small reconciliations. At the pension, Madame put out a dish of radishes and salt, and then looked surprised to find herself pleased by the effect. Anne turned the café clock by 2 minutes to make the dining room feel timely. No one reproached her. The oiled drawer under the till opened like a gentleman. Gérard took a nail from his pocket and put it back for no reason except the comfort of the exchange. Upstairs, number 5 lay as if someone might after all come in damp from a walk and sit to read, which is the politest way rooms keep the dead among the living without being unkind. In number 7, the chairs did not move unless asked. Morel, for once, returned late and went up without a word. Perhaps he had discovered that doors can close quietly, even for those who have practiced another style. Madame did not look after him. She had come to prefer the company of the chairs. Maigret did not linger. He had one last errand that was not an errand at all. He crossed to the café and took the seat that had become his during these days, near the fern where the glass made a reflection out of the house opposite that looked slightly kinder than the original. He ordered beer and did not finish it. He listened to the sound of plates being collected, the dull talk of men who had not yet found out what the day had been about, the reassuring clatter of cups going home to their hooks. If anyone noticed him, they chose the safest conclusion. The policeman had come to like the soup. When he reached Boulevard Richard Lenoir, Madame had pears in a bowl and a casserole that asked to be eaten before it dried. He put his hat down and told her in a few sentences what could be told without turning people into examples. She listened with the practical kindness of women who know the world has many rooms and not enough good chairs. When he came to the part about the hand and the doctor, and Anne's refusal to leave the living untidy, Madame said, "Of course," as if washing a face for the last time were a thing no one should be thanked for. They ate and did not speak much. After, he moved his pipe in that little circle on the tablecloth that always precedes the match. "What did you find?" she asked finally. Not the facts, but what he carried. That there was never a crime. There was a timing, he said. A word borrowed, and the room with the window, and lent. A son who arrived at the hour named in a wire and left just before the man science cares about. A woman who laughed in her throat because the word no was larger than the instrument it came through. A chair moved and returned. And a man who, because he had kept too much in, put his hand where men do when they intend to be brave next time. She nodded, and that meant the talk had done enough work. She rose to tidy a thing that did not need tidying. He sat by the window where the city makes its weather and watched people choose sidewalks. The sky remained stubbornly undecided. Rain might come by 10 or not. He thought of Claire at 2:30 tomorrow, chalk dust on one sleeve, and of Antoine with a receipt folded too carefully in his pocket, learning that courage sometimes looks like going back to barracks on time. He thought of Regal and his saucer, and the biscuit he would need to buy more of. He thought of the kiosk woman, her ladle finding the same circle on the bottom of the pot without, for once, scraping anything loose that wanted to stick. His pipe. Smoke rose, making a column that did not waver until the draft insisted. He smiled to himself, a small private smile that belonged to men who have chosen a profession that often asks for arrests and sometimes asks only for patience. He was satisfied in the only way that matters to his kind, that a house had been put back in order without pretending nothing had happened, that a phrase, room with the window, would now mean for certain people not a compromise but a courtesy, that a third chair could serve for distance one day and for dignity the next, that the arithmetic of these lives had found a balance without anyone having to be humiliated by totals. When at last the rain began, late and almost apologetic, he opened the window a hand's width and let the smell in. Across the room, Madame looked up and said, "You'll damp the curtains," and he said, "They like it," which might have been about curtains or about something else. He closed the window and sat back. Outside, somewhere down by the station, a train gave a low, measured call to nobody in particular. He imagined, without effort, the pension receiving it as it received everything, briefly, politely, without comment. And he imagined, upstairs in the corner room, 3 chairs standing as if they had always been there, which now, in all the ways that mattered, they had.